Good evening. It is 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, July 20th, 2022, and this regular meeting of the Sandpoint City Council is now called to order in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street, Sandpoint, Idaho. For the record, I'm Mayor Shelby Ronstadt presiding. Also present are Councilors Kate McAllister, Deb Rule, Joel Espiro, Andy Grote, Jason Welker, and Justin Dick. We'll now rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I have an announcement to make. Item 6F, which is the proposed amendment to property exchange agreement at Bridge Street and First Avenue, will be removed from the consent calendar and will take up that item directly following the consent calendar. If there are any members of the public who wish to speak on that item, instead of speaking during the public forum, please save your comments for after the consent calendar, at which time we will discuss item 6F. Are there any announcements from council? Any announcements from staff?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, just quickly, we have issued a special event permit for the Spokane to Sandpoint relay that will take place this weekend on Sunday, and it will run from Spokane and it finishes up on our end at the lawn in front of Trinity. So there will be runners back and forth next to City Beach, but most of the activities are in front of the hotel and restaurant itself.
Okay, great, thanks. We'll now proceed with the public forum portion of the meeting, which allows the public to address the council and myself regarding items listed on the consent calendar or on any topic not listed on the agenda. To accommodate those who wish to speak on general items during the public forum, as well as those who wish to speak on specific business items on our agenda, a total of 20 minutes will be dedicated to the public forum at this time. If you'd like to speak and did not have an opportunity to do so, we'll give everyone an opportunity to speak by reopening the public forum at the end of our regular agenda. Those here in chambers who wish to speak will need to complete a sign-up form, which is located by the front door on the table, and hand it to the city clerk up here in front. Those here or those who are on Zoom and wish to speak during the public forum, you will need to raise your hand, and of course you'll need a working microphone. Comments shall not be personally derogatory, nor shall they be personally directed at any individual, organization, or business. Public comment opportunities during meetings are for comments only. Do not direct any questions to council or staff, and please do not approach the dais. Each speaker will be allowed 3 minutes. And again, if you wish to speak regarding the proposed amendment to the property exchange agreement at First Avenue and Bridge Street, please save your comments for when we take that item up directly following the consent calendar. Madam Clerk, is there anyone who signed up to speak during the public forum?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Dean Cannon.
This wasn't specific about that amendment. This is a generic about the regular form. Okay. All right. Let's see my times again. Mayor, council members, I just want to make a kind of a public observation about the Sandpoint Pride Festival. I had the choice today of kind of enjoying the beautiful weather at the beach with my kids. You guys don't have the choice. You guys have to be in here, but I wanted to voice concern more for their future here today. Morality is something that's created and debated outside these doors here. Laws exist to protect the innocence and the dignity of children in our society. Children are far more vulnerable than any grown-up, no matter what social, political identity group that adult belongs to. Section 1602 of Idaho Code is known as the Child Protective Act. Chapter 1, sub B, definitions: abused means any case in which a child has been the victim of sexual conduct, obscene photography, sexual exploitation, harming or threatening of the child's health or welfare, or mental injury of the child. Would an irreversible surgery constitute a mental injury aspired at an event like this? From the pictures and video I've seen, these events walk a very fine line, legally and certainly in taste. And I hope the next legislature addresses the lack of enforcement of these laws. Pride events like the one in Coeur d'Alene are a magnet for combatants, for people on both sides of the political spectrum. If you want to know what these events are really about, look at the fruit they produce. Unrest, divisiveness, and sometimes the potential for violence. These events also groom children into irreversible surgeries. The vast majority go on to regret. The science is in. My brother's gay, and he stopped going to these events years ago. And the word he uses to describe them is toxic. And that all may offend some, but it's the truth. There were over 40 out-of-state license plates at the Sandpoint Pride from Texas, Alaska, Tennessee, California, and so on. Out-of-state attendees come to disguise the fact that these events are not so popular locally, to the local taxpayers anyhow. And I just wonder if anybody thinks that political violence can't happen here, because it can. It's a peaceful town, but that peace doesn't last very long when we're not even able to look after the children. And if an event needs a massive police presence to secure it, I mean, that should be some sort of clue to the adults. Labeling concern as hate is the political way that you silence people. And attempts to silence people historically are also another path to social and political unrest. And we don't need either. It's for the adults to take part in the culture wars. Let's leave our children out of sexual politics and let the city of Sandpoint be known for peaceful streets and the natural beauty that surrounds them. That's all I have to say.
Your time is up, Mr. Cannon. Madam Clerk.
Brennan Weem,
Thanks for your time, folks. I'm actually here to gauge interest, actually kind of to what he was talking about, in an event that I would like to put on here in Sandpoint. As a citizen of this community, I believe it is deeply important that the children of this community are fully aware and supportive of my personal sexual interests. So this event will be held at a private business, and it'll be outside, open to the public, billed as family friendly. I'm looking for financial support from any council member or anyone in the room, actually, to hire some dancers from State Line, male and female. Don't worry, they will not be fully nude. They will be tastefully clothed. One could even say barely legal. And we'll line all the children up in front of them while they do their performance to sexually explicit songs with such names as Ida Banger, other sexually innuendos. And then we'll give all the children ones so that they can tip all of the performers at this event. And so show of hands, anyone who's interested in financially funding this event? Anyone here? No, because that would be absurd. That is a ridiculous notion. Because it is a pride event does not mean it needs to be a degeneracy event. I do not agree that the pride event that was held in Sandpoint has anything to do with the LGBTQ community, most of whom do not agree with bringing children before sexually explicit shows. The argument could be made that it was not sexually explicit because people are somewhat clothed, but if you were there and if you saw videos or pictures of the event, it was not child appropriate. And based on sections of Idaho code, there is no way that our police force, that our city council, that no one can do anything about this. This is not freedom of speech. This is acts being performed upon children and with children's participation up on stage. I would love to see in the next legislative session this to be addressed by the council. And if it's not, I would love to take all your seats away. This is absolutely inappropriate and this cannot happen in our city ever again. Those among us who are ungracious are going to see any complaint that we have as hate. This couldn't be farther from the truth. No one here, no one that I know of that's coming today is going to express an opinion of hate. There's no one here who hates lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender individuals, not even the two-spirited ones, poly, whatever. No one hates them. There is a plethora of psychological evidence that sexualizing children at an early age gives them trauma and is harmful to them and has no place in a decent society or a decent town. I want to thank you very much for the time.
Madam Clerk.
Richard Kramer,
Good afternoon, council. My name is Richard Kramer and I live in Sagal. I don't live in the city of Sandpoint. However, I'm here to talk about this Pride event and how disappointed I am in the leadership of this community. That not only did you allow it, you endorsed it. And it does not represent the bulk of the citizens of this town. And you're going to feel a groundswell. If you think that this was a great event, you just better hold on because there's a groundswell coming against it. Nobody that I have spoken to in this community liked any part of that. And if you had seen what was going on there, and they're grooming the children in this community, you better pay attention. I mean, I have better things to do with my time than come here and address you. This is important, and I'm going to be here as often as it takes to get it changed. Thank you.
Madam Clerk?
Amelia Boyd.
Hello, I'm a city resident of Sandpoint, and I just wanted to address the Constitution of the United States of America, saying that there's a freedom of speech and freedom to peaceful assembly. And it's the parents' responsibility to bring their children to or not attend certain events. So I believe in those freedoms. Just wanted to let you know that I appreciate this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Boyd.
Jennifer Kramer.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Kramer. I'm a resident of Sagal. For listening to me. I am here to speak about the Pride event as well. It's just not healthy for our community. It doesn't belong in our community. It's not the way this community or this county used to be, and it's just wrong. I went down there to pray, and it was really odd that along the fence, they were covering the fence with tarps. You have to ask yourself why. What is it that they don't want the public to see? What is going on in there that they don't want the public to see? Yet there's children in there seeing whatever it is that the rest of us should not see. That's just wrong. It's an immoral. I have nothing against the people themselves. The people are people. But it's immoral to expose children to things that they don't understand and to push that kind of a lifestyle on them when they're too young to understand it and process it. It's proven that there's an increased suicide rate among the youth that have that exposure and then that are put through sex changes or given the puberty blockers or the drugs for their hormones. It has an increased suicide rate. There's proven studies out there, and it's just wrong. And then the fact that they recruited students from Sandpoint High School to help is wrong. It's just wrong. Let the students, anyway, it's just wrong. It's just wrong on all levels. And I speak out of love, and my heart truly breaks for the children. It's just wrong. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Madam Clerk?
Lauren Sanders.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. I'm Lauren and I live here in Sandpoint. And I just wanted to say that I think that it's amazing that Sandpoint is having Pride festivals because it shows that our community is accepting and welcoming of all walks of life. And what we're doing is we're providing a safe space for people. They say that, you know, having people be gay or trans causes suicide or having people be exposed to that. But what we're doing with these kinds of events is we are actually creating a community that shows that we include everyone, that everyone has a space here. So by having these kinds of things going on, it just means that more people are going to find a home in Sandpoint, which I think will only add to the growth and the beauty of our awesome community. So thank you for your time and all that you do. Take care.
Thank you, Ms. Sanders.
Rebecca Holland.
Good evening on this gorgeous night. I'm going to change the subject. some time ago, Molly O'Reilly came and saw you in regards to the fact that there is not a bicycle pedestrian advisory committee. By council ordinance, city ordinance, there is supposed to be. There was for many, many years. And as many of you know, I served on it for, I think, 7, 8 years. And we got a lot of good things done. Molly was co-chair. It is important that the citizens have some involvement there. We would look at all the different plans that were coming in, and Cody at that time, the planning director, told us it was very helpful, our feedback. We also had from staff, Bruce Robinson. All these people are retired as well as I am from this, but I think it's so important. They would take this to the staff meetings and they would talk about it. We would bring up things as a citizen about biking, about walking, and that's not happening. Under the current city administrator, this was eliminated. And it is in your rules to have it. Molly brought it to your attention and she didn't get any feedback. And I think that is atrocious for all that Molly and Steve ever did for this community. And there is so much going on right now, and we're not seeing that represented. One of the things I'm most proud about that we did is we literally passed an ordinance that required certain standards for bike parking. It can't be out at the back next to the trash can without lighting on it at night. If you want people to come to your restaurant, have a place for them. These developments need to have that. You look at everything that's coming down the ropes, and I pay attention to this. I've read, I know everything that's on. It's a packed agenda tonight with this kind of stuff. I'll come back and talk about that because I only got 40 seconds. I'm asking you to please reinstate. I'm pleased to see that you've got tonight two people coming on for the Historical Society. That's good. And the other societies, I have friends on the tree committee. That's good. Why isn't there not a bike committee, bike pedestrian advisory committee? You are required to do this. And I'm going to hold your feet to the fire on this. I swear there's going to be a scathing letter to the editor if I don't see some movement on this, because it was shameful that Molly came and talked and nothing, absolutely nothing became of it. Thank you for your time. 2 seconds, 1 second, go.
Thank you, Ms. Holland.
One moment, Mr. Mayor. That is all I have for public forum signed up in the room, Mr. Mayor, and I do not see any hands raised on Zoom for public forum.
Okay, I do want to make a comment. There was several references to public nudity, illegal public nudity at the Pride Festival this past weekend. I was not there, but we did have law enforcement staff there and throughout the event, and there was no nudity reported. So I just want to be clear on that fact. Moving along. That concludes the public forum portion of the evening this evening. We will now proceed with the consent calendar. And I will remind the council that we removed item 6F to address after the consent calendar. So on the consent calendar this evening are 2 appointments to the Arts, Culture, and Historic Preservation Commission. Hannah Combs, representing the Bonner County Historical Society and Museum, and Mike Lithgow, representing the Kalispel Tribe. Is Mike here with us? Oh, there you are. All right, thanks. Both are in attendance this evening. In case council members have any questions as you consider confirmation of their appointments, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Hannah and Mike for their willingness to serve our community in this capacity. And our council members, I thank you for your consideration of confirmation of these appointments. For the record, the total amount of bills is $1,077,075.67, reflecting $334,315.16 for regular payables and $742,760.51 for payroll. Aside from item 6F, are there any other items council wishes to remove from the consent calendar? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion that the amended consent calendar be approved. So moved.
Second.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
I'd just like to make a comment.
Sure.
I would like to really welcome these two new members of our Historical Preservation Commission. I've known Hannah for a couple of years, and she does, if anybody reads the local paper, she does some amazing stories about Sandpoint's history, and she's partnered with many local businesses, including Schweitzer and Justin and his businesses, many others, to enshrine and display Sandpoint's rich history through photographs and architectural advice and so on. And when I saw Mike's name on the agenda last week, I had no idea who he was, but yesterday I had the pleasure of spending the whole day with Mike, giving him a tour of the Sand Creek and the little Sand Creek watershed. And I was very impressed with his knowledge of the local flora and fauna, and just his interest and passion in the native history in our region. So I'm really excited to welcome both of them to that commission.
Great, thank you. Appreciate that, Counselor. Moving on.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
I believe we'll have a vote on this. We have a first and a second. Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Sprow,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Walker.
Yes.
Consent calendar is approved as amended. With item 6F removed from the consent calendar, I'd like to ask Infrastructure and Development Services Director Amanda Wilson and City Planner Amy Tweeten to provide some background information on this item, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and good evening. I will begin the presentation with a little bit of background information regarding tonight's requested action, and then I will turn it over to Amy with some additional information. First is the requested action is an amendment to the agreement for exchange of real property with Bridge Street LLC. And just as a reminder, the location is Bridge Street and First Avenue, as represented on this map. Regarding background, I went back a little bit further with history. 1958, the city actually received Kelch's addition via a county deed. And just to clarify what Kelch's addition is, it's the property that the city currently owns, which is this parcel right here, comprised of 6 lots. In 2012, the city adopted the downtown streets and design guidelines. That was really the first time that we had a formal concept adopted by city council with proposed solutions for how to improve Farmers Landing. In 2016, we actually purchased a portion of the property. I'm going to go back to the map for reference, which is this section here immediately adjacent to Sand Creek on the back side of the properties that front First Avenue. The purpose of that purchase was primarily for stormwater improvements and bank stabilization. And moving forward in 2018, the city conducted a number of public workshops. We presented a report to city council, as well as further refinement of a concept for Farmers Landing. That concept at that time included closing the ramp that accesses Bridge Street at this time. That was the first concept where that was presented to the public. And then, as many of you, in fact, probably the entire community will recall, on February 11th of 2019, we unfortunately had a structure fire that damaged the entire building on both lots, and the city deemed the structure unsafe for occupancy. Fast forward a few months, in September, specifically September 16th of 2019, Bridge Street LLC purchased the property, and that is the current owner today. And by the property, I mean the 2 lots that were represented in the map with the circle. So this lot as well as this lot. In September of 2020, city adopted the Parks and Rec Master Plan, which included a further refined concept and the current concept for Farmers Landing that I will show a map of here in a second. And then, just as a reminder, in May of 2021, City Council also adopted the Multimodal Transportation Plan that further assessed how we were going to get pedestrians and bicyclists through our downtown core all the way to City Beach. As a reminder, this is our adopted Sand Creek downtown waterfront concept, specific to not only Farmers Landing, but also showing additional improvements along Sand Creek. Farmers Landing is, as you're all aware, this location right here. And the Bridge Street LLC property is represented in this salmon color on the corner of Bridge and First. As an additional reminder, this is the concept for a short-term solution for our downtown revitalization phase 3 improvements along First Avenue. First Avenue running up and down on the drawing and Bridge Street running east and west, maintaining a total of 28 feet of drive aisle along Bridge Street, as well as providing for an improved sidewalk on the north that actually serves as a multi-use pedestrian and bicycle access, connecting to the existing shared bike and pedestrian bridge across Sand Creek. As City Council will recall, when Bridge Street LLC purchased the property, we began conversations regarding the city's goals at this location, specific to the drawings I just reflected, as well as the developer's proposed solutions for the future. These slides were pulled directly from our original slide presentation that we provided council. Our 3 goals at that time were to obtain additional right-of-way along Bridge Street. We wanted, as I just mentioned, to implement our downtown waterfront concept, as well as improve our stormwater management along Sand Creek. The developer's goals at that time were specifically to require or to acquire, I apologize, 3,678 square feet of a city parcel. I'll explain a little bit more in detail what that is. To enable a larger building with improved water access, stairs, and a landing. It was always contemplated to be a mixed-use single building. And then to provide a shared deck space that was both available for the public as well as private. For those of you that will recall and were here when the Hound was present, they had that shared outdoor deck space that you could sit and enjoy pizza looking over at the waterfront. The last goal obviously did not happen, but at that time is the developers or the property owner's goal was to bring back the Hound, and they have since relocated on Superior. This was the schematic that was provided to City Council and the public, representing specifically what was intended by the exchange. I'll walk you through the drawing just as a reminder. The red outline represents what the property owner currently owns. The blue shaded highlight represents what the city owns currently, as well as the purple. The yellow represents additional right-of-way that the city, should this exchange continue to move forward as presented, would acquire. So again, the yellow is not an easement. That is additional right-of-way dedication of private property to become public right-of-way. The purpose of that is, again, to enable our downtown revitalization project to provide for a 12-foot wide sidewalk, which is consistent through our downtown core. The orange box is representing an additional easement that would be provided, giving access to pedestrians in a north-south fashion, specifically envisioning that in the future, there might be future access needed at a higher elevation at that location. And then the last but not least, the blue is representing where stairs will go in the future so that pedestrians will have access from the multi-use bridge that crosses Sand Creek down to the boardwalk and down to that future plaza. Just to emphasize, the purple is 25 feet set back from the artificial high water mark along Sand Creek. That has always been contemplated and remains to be within the agreement owned by the public. The timeline for the exchange agreement was in August 26th of 2020. City Council declared the value of the property and the intent to exchange property. In September, the City Council approved the property exchange, and it was recently in March, in September of 16, just to clarify, that was a public hearing. On March 2nd of 2022, City Council approved the actual agreement for exchange of real property, and that's where we provided specific details regarding dollar values that were previously discussed, as well as memorializing all of the exhibits that we just provided. To review that again, Bridge Street would be providing in this agreement the public 6 feet of additional right-of-way. They would be providing an easement and public access on the east side of the property. They would also be providing the city $256,592 towards an investment specific to the city's Farmers Landing project. It can only be used for that project. Additionally, they have an obligation in the agreement to construct the 12-foot wide sidewalk along Bridge Street, which at the time that this agreement was negotiated was estimated at a value of $74,055. And what the public provides in this agreement in exchange for those 4 items above is approximately 3,000 square feet, and the public remains 100%, retains 100% ownership of the waterfront buffer. So again, what we're asking for this evening is a request for approval to amend the agreement. The only requested amendments are to push the closing date to August 1st, 2022. And the purpose of that, as represented in the staff report, was to enable us to complete a plating process. The original agreement contemplated April 15th for a closing date. However, as we got closer to that closing date, we realized that it was imperative we completed the plating process prior to closing on the agreement. So that was actually a staff and legal recommendation that we complete that process before closing. That was not at the fault of the property owner. Additionally, to enable us to further coordinate on the design and integration with the 2 projects, staff is proposing that we extend the required completion of their foundations to August 30th, 2023. That date was contemplated as a result of us intending to start our downtown revitalization phase 3 project in September of 2023 after our peak season next year. With that said, especially given a significant amount of public comment most recently once this agenda was posted, I wanted to provide a little bit of status regarding the Bridge Street LLC project, and then also turn it over to Amy to give more information. To clarify, there has been no building permit application received by the city to date. We have had multiple pre-application meetings with the property owner and city staff to discuss the various city code requirements as they continue to progress their design forward. They did complete the foundations that you see in place today. To clarify, those are temporary sheet piles, as we've discussed on a number of occasions. Those were requested by city staff to ensure that a proper sidewalk that was safe for our peak season could be completed until all of this other work was done. Those sheet piles will be removed and the foundation actually goes on the back side of them. That foundation supports our road and our sidewalk. It needs to be done before they can actually proceed. Most recently, the property owner released promotional material. By promotional material, I mean conceptual renderings that are released, again, by the property owner to attract pre-sales. They do not reflect city code and they are cartoon in nature, meaning the modeling program presents a cartoon image. They are not construction drawings. The next steps would be, for your consideration this evening, amending the agreement to provide for us to move forward with closing on the property, which is what it takes for us to receive the funds that I previously mentioned, as well as their security deposit to complete the work on time and to record the plat. And then the next step would be for them to submit a building permit application and pay the appropriate review fees for that. City staff would conduct a thorough code compliance review. That process typically takes about 2 to 3 months, especially with a complex project like this. The permit would potentially be issued, assuming that they're able to comply with all of those code provisions, and then begin construction. The date of completion for the project, frankly, is to be determined. There are too many variables at this time for city staff to be in a position to speculate as to when that project will be completed. However, what we can say is that the agreement, including the proposed amendment, would provide that the foundations are in place to enable our projects to move forward on schedule and as intended. Now I'll turn it over to Amy to talk to you a little bit more about code compliance review.
Amanda, Mr. Mayor, is it possible to ask you a quick question, Amanda?
Sure.
Do you mind going back to the aerial view of the property with the different properties outlined? It dawned on me looking at this and then looking at the, the ones with the one that you just passed a second ago. Yeah, that one. And then looking also at the cartoonish drawings that were released and shared widely in social media in the last week. Did the city consider extending the right of way that would be granted or deeded to the city, the yellow strip, all the way to the bridge, so that there's not a triangle of blue that the developer has the right to? And also, when you look at the cartoonish drawings that were on their website, indeed, the 12-foot sidewalk appears to narrow to about 3 feet in the southeast corner of the property. And I wonder, there's been talks in presentations in past meetings about, and in fact, on the parks concept plan that you showed, that's identified as a shared use pathway that bicycles might be allowed on the sidewalk to get from there to the bicycle path on the existing bicycle path on Bridge Street. I just am wondering how we ended up with what seems to be a 3-foot wide section of sidewalk where the sidewalk should be 12 feet wide. And did the city ever consider extending that deeded strip all the way to the bridge?
Great question. Mr. Mayor, would you like me to address
Please.
it? I appreciate that you noted that was a cartoon.
Well,
Jennifer and I
you
worked-
noted it, and I realized, yes, there are literally cartoon people in the pictures. Yeah.
There are
So
cartoon
it's true.
people, and I will say that it was Jennifer and I that created the colored drawing that you were just asking about in preparation for a presentation, recognizing that the details would need to be further refined. In your staff packet for this item, we included the plat. The plat is really where the devil's in the details on the plat. That is the legal representation of what would be exchanged. And quite frankly, it is it more represents what you're talking about. So on this plat, on the lower left of your screen, it says 900 square feet.
Mhm.
That portion, and I think I have the wrong one pulled up. I can still use it to speak to it, though. I apologize. I have the wrong plat pulled up. Can you see my mouse okay?
Mhm.
All right. So this corner, which is represented as L10, and this section here, the 900 square feet being the additional right of way to be received by the city. This corner L10 actually extends in the final plat to the east and then goes north. In other words, when we went to do the plat, that corner that you're talking about is currently on city property and remains on city property. It is not for the developer. So if you are on site, the corner of the bridge to the corner of this L10 is where the property exchange limits exist. In other words, exactly what you're asking for that pedestrian bridge to extend to the west so that the corner couldn't be developed by a bridge is exactly what the plat provides for.
Okay, so both the purple area in the previous slide and the cartoon drawings on the website are inaccurate
Yes, it will not be a 3-foot wide sidewalk. It'll be 12 feet.
all the way from the existing shared use lane on the bridge to First Avenue.
Correct. And I'll show you on this drawing because I think it might make it a little bit easier to explain. Maybe. So here's the corner of the pedestrian bridge.
Mhm.
The final plat takes this line from here, following my cursor to the top of
Okay.
that easement or
Much
that
better.
dedication. Apologies.
I was really looking forward to the Looney Tunes cartoons funneling down into some sort of bottleneck on their bikes and skateboards.
Coyote with a rocket.
Just a video cartoonish type of.
Thank you, Amanda.
You're welcome.
Must have a little levity occasionally.
Of course.
Any other questions before we have Amy review the code compliance?
Thank you. Just following up on where we are today and what happens from here forward once a permit is applied for. The code that we will review this development by are Title 7, 8, 9, and 11, which covers public rights of ways, utilities, building, fire, zoning, and stormwater. And then Title 9 is the zoning. And that is where the provisions addressing the comprehensive plan intended to maintain the downtown character, though is where most of those are. And that part of the code was adopted in 2010 and 2014. As the code states there, it is a staff review of these codes. There is not a public hearing. It does not go to the planning commission or city council. Unless a building has a footprint of 15,000 square feet or more. And this site does not have that big of a footprint. So in the, this is the commercial A district. The use must have a commercial storefront on the first floor and residential uses are allowed above. The maximum height is 65 feet if you have parking as under the building or residential use in the upper stories. And then it is, there are no setbacks. The building is allowed to be built, actually required to be built from lot line to lot line on all sides. Then there are also design standards and both in all of the commercial A, B, and C districts. Those standards are intended to provide human scale design while affording flexibility to use a variety of building styles. Compatibility is achieved through techniques such as repetition of roof lines, use of similar proportions in building mass, similar relationships to the street, similar door and window patterns, and the use of complementary building materials. So the code is not looking for a particular style, architectural style. It is giving leeway to a designer to meet the requirements of the code. Next slide, please.
Mr. Mayor, may I ask a
Yeah.
question? Is there not somewhere else in the code where there would be step backs?
There is.
So it wouldn't appear as a straight faced building. And can you speak to that briefly?
Yeah. Above the 35-foot building height limit, there's a requirement to set back from there to the 65-foot. And that is, if you could go down one slide. That's to address building massing. So what the design standards in the district are trying to accomplish first is addressing the building massing. And that is new buildings, if they're not similar size, if they're taller, they have to be articulated and subdivided into smaller portions to reduce the mass and scale of the building. They also have to have spacing of similar shaped windows with trim and other decorative molding stories. Cornices are intended to break up the different stories and to create visual interest, particularly the separating the ground floor from the upper stories. And then the facade, if it's a wide building, it has to be vertically separated. And what you are asking about is in this category as well. It's 65 feet, but only about 3 stories of it is right at the property line. And then beyond, the height above that is step back. Then the design standards are also trying to enhance the walkability of downtown as a pedestrian-oriented district and requires clear glass windows on commercial storefronts, civic spaces to create gathering areas for pedestrians downtown, and then the display windows. So as you're walking down the street, you don't have a blank wall you're walking in front of. There is visual interest. It creates interest for the pedestrian. And then it also discusses compatible building materials and that on all facades, not just on street fronting facades, the required materials are stone, brick, or finished wood.
That's a quick question about that, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
That seems a little vague to me. For example, what percentage of the exterior materials must be stone, brick, or finished wood? A building that's treated with some brick, for example, can it then also use other materials besides stone or wood?
I read this to be one of those three materials.
Accommodation.
So it isn't storefront if it's not storefront windows, it needs to be one of these three materials.
And what is finished wood? I'm just curious what that refers to specifically.
I would
those-
say it's not rough hewn
Plywood.
or plywood. Yeah.
Not plywood, or yes. So any sort of wood paneling or wood siding, but no, there is something, I read something about shiny surfaces, no reflective surfaces.
Correct. That is there in addition. Yep.
So no aluminum siding in downtown buildings or steel or anything like that.
Those are not allowed. No. So those are, again, trying to give designers flexibility, but set out the parameters for what design elements we are looking for in the downtown.
Please continue. Was that it?
Yes.
That's the end of our presentation.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if you would like, I can take a second to find that correct plat. If you have an
Sure.
interest.
Yeah. Are there any other questions for either Emmy or?
I
Mindy?
have a question, but it's for Andy.
Okay.
Andy, this was brought up in an email that was sent to us, and I know I brought it up before, but I just want clarification on, someone asked if we could put a moratorium on downtown building or commercial building until whatever can be figured out. A moratorium is not possible, am I correct?
Counselor, that's correct.
Okay,
I know I am not aware of any basis to declare a moratorium on any kind of commercial building in the downtown area.
Right.
Also,
And can you elaborate on that briefly, Andy, and just explain what you mean by that?
sure.
What?
A moratorium would essentially terminate any further commercial development in the downtown area. To do so could be considered regulatory taking. In other words, the property owner has a piece of property, meets the requirements for building on a particular lot, satisfies the building codes, has a permit that's issued, and we were to say, no, you can't build the building, we would be subject to a claim for taking a property interest in that particular in that property. I also know that my co-counsel Fonda Jovic has expressed that opinion with regard to other planning and zoning issues. So I think that to do so would expose the city to liability in that regard.
Thank you. Council, are there any other questions for staff at this moment?
I have questions, but if Amanda would like to show us the correct, that looks a lot better, Amanda.
Apologize for that. I had the wrong attachment. I'm sorry. So this is representing what I described to you verbally before, where L10, the property line, veers to the north and then over to the east. This is smaller than that blue image that was shown on the other drawing. And the reason for that is this, where my cursor is right here. This is all currently city property and will remain city property. The city retains lot 2 with the Bridge Street LLC obtaining lot 1. Does that explanation make sense?
So in conclusion, the possibility exists for a 12-foot wide shared use path from First Street all the way to Bridge Street,
Correct.
or sorry, all the way to the bridge.
Correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And it's worth mentioning, and this was detailed in one of the former slides that Amanda showed. That bridge is in need of replacement at some point soon. And our aspiration there is to widen the multimodal path on the south side of the bridge as well. And so there would be a corresponding, 12-foot width on the south side sidewalk south of what we're looking at right here.
May we comment now, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Or ask questions? Okay.
Let's get the questions out and then we'll go into public comment.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Okay.
Amy, question for you. having come from planning and zoning 2 years and seen dozens of conditional use permit applications, it dawned on me that in that time and in my half year now on city council, I've never seen a conditional use permit application for a commercial development. Our standards in residential zones seem pretty high. I should say the threshold seems pretty low for triggering a conditional use permit. Any subdivision of any size requires a CUP. Sorry, short plats, subdivision of 1 acre or more. What am I getting wrong here?
No subdivisions require a conditional use permit.
Okay, but there's a subdivision permit process that's different from the CUP. Okay, but there is a public hearing, there is a presentation to planning and zoning, to city council. Another requirement is that any development with 8 or more dwelling units requires a conditional use permit in a residential zone. So when I first saw the plan last week, or the cartoon drawings of this development, and saw that it included 13 dwelling units averaging 2,600 square feet in size, 3 bedroom, 2 bath and larger, I just naively assumed, oh, there will be a CUP process because this is more than 8. I only learned recently that, in fact, residential developments of any size are allowed in the commercial zone without a CUP. So next I thought, well, there's well over 50,000 square feet of dwelling and commercial space in this development. So the 15,000 square feet will trigger a CUP, but then of course it turns out that's the building footprint size. So I was quite surprised this afternoon to learn that there's no opportunity. There will be no further opportunity for public input on this development after tonight. Correct?
There is an appeal period after staff review. Should the permit be approved, there is then an appeal period. But there, you are correct, there is no public hearing before approval.
Okay, so from this point forward, all communication with the developer and all expectations or requirements imposed on the developer are at the discretion of you at the administrative level, correct?
Not just myself.
You and staff.
Because at the staff level, correct.
Okay. In your experience and in other planning departments in other cities, do you believe that our permitting requirements for the commercial zone are robust enough relative? I just think relative to residential, it seems that almost any development triggers a public hearing or a process at the residential level, but almost no developments will trigger a public hearing process, especially given the small sizes of our downtown lots and the fact that, you know, very, very few lots are going to be more than 15,000 square feet. It's now apparent that there's lots of development coming in the next few years downtown. And I fear that whatever ends up at First and Bridge Street will set a precedent and a standard that will be impossible for us to go back on in the future. And I think I share the sentiment with many in the public that the cartoonish drawings that were released were somewhat shocking in their scale and size, bulk, scale, and mass, as our code language says. So I wanted to ask, in your experience in other cities, how do you feel our code compares to other cities in terms of the rigor required of developers in going through the public hearing process to get approved for commercial development?
From my experience, our code does rely heavily on staff review and probably more heavily than other codes that I've worked with that have more projects that go through the conditional use or site plan approval process. In a downtown, it is not unusual that there is not, because there's not a lot of sites, you're usually building lot line to lot line, that your code is very specific. The direction is more towards form-based codes, or you spell out, it's more proscriptive. I might get the word proscriptive versus you're telling people what you want. They're not guessing. So by those design standards that I went through, you're setting the broad parameter. And then the reviewers look at it and you have some flexibility, but those are the basic standards you need to meet. So in a downtown, it is not unusual that you don't have a large public hearing process once you get to the point of adopting a code that implements your comprehensive plan.
So given that our comp plan is not updated yet, we're in that process right now. It's been 14 years, I think, 13 years since the last complete update of the comp plan. And I don't know when the Title IX language was adopted with regard to design standards, building heights, and so on. But I do really appreciate the opening statement or opening sentences of the design standards section of our code. And I'd just like to read that really quickly, just very brief. The community's commercial character is especially vulnerable to intrusion from incompatible uses and physical development practices which are inconsistent with historic fabric. The purpose of these zones is to establish requirements for building and site design for new development and for the significant modification of existing developments within commercial areas. The city's downtown, designated as Commercial A, which this is so important and significant to the city that it justifies a special set of regulations designed to protect and enhance its character in light of new development. So that language is like, wow, we really nailed it with that language. But then when you get down into the design standards themselves, I just wonder, you said the term like broad or general language. Do you think our language is specific enough at present to allow development like this and the many more developments that are coming to fulfill that vision outlined in that opening statement of protecting and enhancing the character of downtown, the historic character of downtown?
Well, I can tell you it doesn't talk about architectural styles. It's, again, it's trying to it's leaving it open to designers to meet those standards. So it's, I guess I can't say whether it can protect the historic fabric, but the intent was put in at the same time as those standards. So I have to believe that the writers of the code at the time felt that those were the important elements to create a pedestrian-oriented fabric of downtown buildings compatible with what was there currently.
Okay.
But clearly the building heights in the code are higher than a lot of the buildings that are there now. But again, I would say the commercial districts very much encourage infill development. And that is the way the code is written, is we want infill development. We'll give extra incentive in height for residential uses because we want residential use to create synergy in the downtown.
Vitality, I think, was the language.
Vitality, right.
Yeah.
Support an active
So there were
streetscape.
a lot of very progressive components put into that code. But I guess I can't completely answer to everyone's satisfaction. You know, design can be subjective.
And I apologize for putting you on the spot. In fact, the question should not have been for you. It's actually for the rest of council. Are we as council comfortable that the language in code with regards to design standards and building heights is specific enough to assure that the coming development meets the vision of the comp plan and the purpose and intent of our commercial zone design standards? So if so, then let's go ahead and approve this tonight, and we'll probably never hear about it again until it's done. If not, I would suggest that we postpone this approval and we have further discussion about this topic because this will likely be the last time we hear anything about it unless it gets appealed by the citizenry in the future.
Councilor, yeah, you go ahead. You go first.
I would just like to say that I think during a lot of the development of these standards, I did sit on the planning commission. And there were large, long conversations about, do we want to, for example, turn into Leavenworth, where we're so restrictive that every building turns us into sort of this Disneyland type of place. And so where do you draw those lines? So there was a lot of time put into this to figure out how can you be vague enough, but direct enough. Lots of discussions about heights and how high should we go and what existing buildings are in town. So I'd be more than happy to sit down with any of the other council members, not of course as a quorum, but one-on-one to discuss any of my personal experiences while sitting on planning commission, or meet with Amy and Amanda to help you understand where we got there. Of course, that was 2 terms on council now. That was almost 10 years ago. So we were living in a little bit different world than we are now. So I do share some of your concerns and the public concerns about how things are going to progress for downtown. But I think that was for individuals on planning commission who are volunteers who have no planning experience, we did have an architect, a wonderful architect, actually 2 on and off throughout that process that were extremely helpful and directing us down paths so that we didn't end up with, 6-story flat front brick buildings without windows, and help us understand how that all worked. But like I said, I know this can be a long meeting, so that's probably plenty, but I just wanted to put that out there for everybody.
Councilor Rule, I appreciate those comments, and I would support everything you said there with maybe one caveat, and that is, I want to be clear that there actually was a lot of professional thought and guidance that went into the 2009 comprehensive plan and then the new zoning code that followed. And certainly there was a lot of time and effort and thought put into size and bulk and scale of buildings, particularly in our downtown core, but this was a consistent conversation throughout the city in every zone. And clearly there was a driver at that time, as Ms. Tweeten said, to really encourage an active streetscape and economic vitality downtown. And so there was clearly a movement, not just among the steering committee and the Planning and Zoning Commission at the time, but within the community. And at the time in 2009, that comprehensive plan process that we went through at the time was the most robust public engagement effort that the city had undertaken. There were more public meetings, more public workshops, and opportunities for the public to weigh in on the priorities and the direction that our new land use policy was headed. And it was thoroughly vetted by the community, by the Planning and Zoning Committee, and then ultimately by the City Council before it was finally approved unanimously. And I will say that I think it was actually remanded from the City Council back to the Planning and Zoning Commission more than once because there was so much careful thought and consideration put into this. And in every one of those meetings, there was clear engagement from the public. So I just want to reiterate that this was a robust process. And I hear your point. Absolutely. We are 13 years, further down the road in history here. And it's absolutely the right time to revisit these things. But when we have a development proposal that's before us, that land was purchased under the rules as they sit today. Those are the design and building regulations, the zoning regulations as they sit today. And the building owner has every right to be able to expect to develop as to the current city standards. And so I think, to go back to the sort of original intent of both the steering committee on which I sat, then I sat on the Planning and Zoning Commission as it was being approved, as did Councilor Rule, and ultimately was approved by City Council. By the way, Councilor Rule and I were on, no, I guess we were still on Planning and Zoning when we finished all the zones. Sorry, I was on, we were there that whole time, basically. And I can just say that, again, to Amy's point, really the focus was on how do we, it's always trying to strike a balance, right? How do we give as much liberty to the property owner and architects out there to be able to, do what they do, but us to be able to protect the city in terms of size, bulk, scale, walkability, the things that we want in our town, and the look and feel, right? And we thought that the best way that we could strike that balance was to regulate materials, regulate size, bulk, and scale, but give the developer, the architect, the liberty to come up with their own creativity in terms of how that's applied. With this, one of the I think themes that was present throughout the comp plan revision process, again, to drive that commercial activity downtown where we wanted. It made it, all the modern planning movement and smart planning recognizes that an active streetscape and active downtown is largely a result of having beds downtowns. And, for a community like ours, we haven't had it much residential downtown. And so in order to incentivize that, that's why the commission, the council, the steering committee, the community thought that it was worth the sacrifice to go to a 65-foot building height, recognizing, it's a big step for us to go an additional 20 foot in our sort of standard building height in our commercial A area. But that was a worthy sacrifice in order to have the benefit on the other end of an active streetscape, an active economy downtown. And we thought that we could strike that balance with the community that we want to live in by ultimately ending up with the code that we have here today. And I just want to put in one more plug here. And I thought an important part of that compromise in this process was that step back at the 35 feet, because at the streetscape level, that really is what you see. If you've been to, as you walk down First Avenue now, you see the eaves that come down, and you don't, we don't pay a lot of attention what happens about 35 feet when it's set back from the building frontage. So these were some of the ways that we tried to accommodate. And I think that there can be a danger up here on this body or the Planning and Zoning Commission when we try to legislate in the moment, and it's easy to forget that there was a robust process that got us this code that we have today. And I'm not saying that it's perfect and that it's not worthy of being reviewed and revised, and certainly we're in that process right now. But we didn't just pull this, out of nowhere. This was part of a community-driven process, and that's the code that we're working with today, and that's the expectation that property owners living within that zone, that's what they're living under. So the expectation to be able to build under those rights. Does anyone else want to comment or have any questions for staff? If not, we can save more deliberation for after the public comment. But I do want to give one more opportunity for anyone to ask questions of staff so we can get all the information out. Okay, and maybe it's important, so I'll take my own advice here. Andy, if you can give us some perspective on, so we talked about the moratorium, but if, are there other, when does a potential takings claim come into play? And are there other tools that this body would have, or is there another tool this body would have to be able to restrict a developer from building something that is currently allowed by code?
Mr. Mayor, takings would occur if a developer or property owner proposes a building that meets the requirements of the code with regard to height, size, square footage, as you stated. And the city would unilaterally just say, well, no, we're not going to allow that within the confines of, what we would allow you to build on the site. I don't know the exact bulk requirements for this particular site, but if the building permit, if the builder or developer wishes to build a building within those confines, and we would restrict it for some reason other than it does not meet those requirements, I just unilaterally saying, well, no, we just don't like that to be built there, then that would be a point where the developer or builder or owner would consider some type of cause of action for a regulatory taking. In other words, if you're allowed to build the building on site and we just for an arbitrary reason say, no, you can't do that, then we potentially could be subject to a taking.
And saying we don't like our code the way it's written would be an arbitrary reason. Is that fair?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So then the next question would be, if council determined that that it was necessary to postpone this amendment then it would be put and requested to put staff or requested the city to come up with a regulatory framework or to change the code for commercial A in order to accommodate this new vision. And this is a question for staff, Jennifer. What would it take for us to basically be able to freeze this development, change the commercial A zoning code, building regulation, design guidelines, to move forward? Is that clear?
Yep.
Do I need to restate that? Kind of trailed off at the end there.
I don't know if I can speak to specifics on it, and I would, I think, jump over to Amy to speak about it further. I think what certainly mayor and council through mayor direction could direct staff to prioritize code change as to address some of the issues as discussed tonight. I think what you and the council would want to consider with that is we don't have more staff to do that. What it would impact is other developments and projects that are coming through the city and our timeliness to be able to process those, as well as we are in discussions as to whether we can fit it into the next council meeting, or do we do a special meeting to give a full update and plan on the launch of the update to the comp plan. And certainly to take on this could affect that timing as well. So Amy, I don't know if you have anything you want to add, if you've thought about that any further.
A code amendment, just, I mean, it would take several months. I guess the short answer is, generally, we'd have to come up with some basic language. We'd have several meetings with the planning commission, trying to come up with what are the changes that need. First, what are we trying to achieve? What are the changes needed? What's the language? Then that has to go through the whole public hearing process, both at the planning commission and city council. So I would put it at easily 3 to 4 months.
Okay, best case scenario, no doubt. And that's would be assuming that the goal there, as I'm hearing from don't let me put words in your mouth, but I'm assuming that your interest here is to, well, let me ask you, to reduce the building height? I mean, is that the
Not
end goal here?
specifically, it's to make sure that this isn't the last time we talk about this development as a city and future development. And the code amendment that I'm thinking of wouldn't require 3 months. It would require the change of one number, and that would be 5 to 0, 15,000 square feet to 10,000 square feet, because there's hardly any lots downtown that are larger than 15,000 square feet. So changing that one number in code would trigger the CUP process for almost all future major developments downtown. 10,000 square feet is still a quarter of an acre, almost, about a fifth of an acre. So yeah, just changing that one code. And what I'm thinking is not that, I've been through so many CUP hearings in planning and zoning. What it enables is the P&Z commission to look more rigorously at our code, because it is pretty vague, and then look at the plans that are brought forward and impose conditions that are within the law, that are within our code. But without a CUP process, any conditions are at the discretion of staff, and there's just no public involvement. So that's all I'm asking, is that the public isn't cut out of all future development downtown, because we set the 15,000 foot number instead of a more realistic lot size number for downtown development.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Just one quick question. So, and this is kind of anybody out there. I know there's a big concern today about that one development, but as we move forward, when we make these changes, if we were to make changes in the code, we're not grandfathered into anything else. As long as your building permit, when your building permit goes in, that's relative to when we change our code, correct? So if we were to change our code in 4 months or in 9 months or whenever that was, if your building permit isn't in by then you have to be held by the new standards. If your building permit is in before that, then you would use the the standards that were current as far as the law goes, so we wouldn't get caught up in takings, correct?
Yes, Counselor. Just one comment too on the question about, or the issue about amending the code. I think that you could potentially have some liability if you were to change the code for one particular project.
As I made clear, though, this is for all future projects downtown.
Yes, Amy?
And I just need to clarify that 15,000 square foot footprint is for all the commercial districts.
Exactly.
So that's commercial A, B, and C.
It is currently, yes.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Just a lot of the chatter I'm hearing from the community. I understand code is being addressed here, and I think the concern from the community, and I'm a big proponent of property rights. I have no problem with that, but I want to give the community, and I guess they'll have an opportunity to speak, but to be clear on code 9-2-1-6, building design and standards, the concern is that the structure will not be with the identity and character of the community. And that's actually in code. So I wouldn't say it's arbitrary to say that if a council member or as a whole decided to table this and discuss it more, I wouldn't say it's arbitrary. I would say that one can make the argument, plain devil's advocate here, that it's not to the identity and character of the current community, but it's being developed to be attractive to a possible future community that's coming here, possibly with a lot more money than, say, your locals have. Just want to be clear on that. I don't think it's arbitrary for one to debate the code on that. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I'd like to point out that's not actually what we're voting on today.
No.
That's correct.
There is no permit that's been applied for yet for this building. So although I think these are conversations that need to be had later that we've already discussed, we need to have code updates and such. I think that we need to vote on the current issue here and save some of these conversations for later, because I think they're all very, very important to the public and to all of us.
Okay. And lastly, I just want to comment, Councillor Welker, on your last comment there. On the surface, it may seem as simple as, changing one number. But there's actually a lot of thought that goes through the land use plan and the zoning code. And as Amy just pointed out, that limitation, 25,000 square feet for CUP, is in all commercial districts. And so if we were to, say, make a quick change like that, I think there would be a lot of unintended consequences in the commercial BC and other areas in the city that maybe we're not thinking about up here in this moment. And so, even a small change like that really requires careful consideration, not to be made hastily. But I think your point is well taken.
As is yours. Thank you.
And with that, we are going to hear from all of you. So if there's anyone out there in the public that would like to speak on this issue, now is your moment. Madam Clerk, who do we have?
Carl Fish.
Hello there. I do reside in the city of Sandpoint. I do have along the lines of the same concern of that 15,000 feet requirement does not restrict enough to our heart and identity of the community. And so it is imperative that our community does determine if a structure is adhering to those identity of Sandpoint. The other concern I did have was looking at that easement from L10 to L14 over to L4, which is the existing drive down into, I think it's called Gunning Alley. That concerns me for emergency vehicle access, because that is one of two areas for emergency vehicles to get down to an emergency on the water at that west shore of Sand Creek. So another one is it also impedes the winter traffic escape route. Say if the Canada gets blocked up there, we have no other way to get vehicles out of there should something, God forbid, happen. So Also, just the visual appearance just did not seem like it looks like the buildings around it. I attend the church that's right on that border of that property, and if that were to be 65 feet tall, that's twice as tall as the building next to it. So it doesn't really look to me like the buildings next to it. So any other safety concerns? Maybe want to review, make sure Selkirk Fire has a ladder truck that's tall enough in case we do need to have a rescue operation there. I would hate for another February 2019 incident to happen and we can't safely get people out. So I think that is my concerns. And yeah, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fish. Appreciate those comments. And just to allay your concerns there, we do have a ladder truck that's fit to go up to 65-foot structure, and we do have other 65-foot structures downtown. Madam Clerk?
Lauren Sanders.
Thanks again for your time tonight. And also thanks for all your hard work with this. I know you're doing a lot. I just wanted to say something. I'm like the rest of the public. I saw the One Bridge cartoons and struck a chord with me just because the character, and I know it's not what we're talking about, but that's what brought me here. So can I ask a question? And can you respond?
Sure.
Okay, so my question is, what happens if the council decides to vote against the extension? Like to the project? Does it just like push it out further or?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the contract would expire. Jennifer or Andy, do you want to, or Amanda, who would want to field that?
The contract.
You gave us a stumper. Go ahead.
Contract has a provision for, timeline. So as we sit here today, we do not have those timelines in place. In other words, we've missed those deadlines. Unfortunately, most of the delay was brought on by our need to plat the property rather than rely upon a meets and bounds description for the easement and for the property that was to be, conveyed to the developer. So I'd like to give you a definitive answer, but I can't.
Sure.
There was a delay caused in some small, or not small part, in some part by the city.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, okay, well, that's interesting because I don't know, you'd think you'd kind of know what would happen for a project of this scope. There seems to be a lot of like loose ends that, I mean, we should know this kind of information, especially when something like this is being put in to like the heart of our community. So I would just hope you all vote against this for right now so we can, we're kind of setting the precedent for the future of our town, but I know all the time you're putting into this, so I don't want to discredit all your hard work. So thanks for all you do and thanks for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Sanders. Appreciate that.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think it's important to note, since the issue of timeline has been brought up, that part of the delay relative to the ability to plat was waiting for a survey on the properties, and we needed to have concept from the developer so that we could actually complete the survey. And so back to the image that was originally shown to council and the difference between that and then the plat that is shown, it was it was the survey that impacted that, as well as getting kind of that final layout from the developer, which informed the survey as well. So we're delayed substantially on numbers of issues as our developers with times to get surveys. And while we appreciate that our local firm really expedites city projects, nonetheless, they have a lot in the queue. So that did impact our timeline.
Okay, let me
Mr.
ask
Mayor?
this. Yeah, go ahead, Andy.
Mr. Mayor, I also want to point out that the vote on the land exchange took place some time ago. So conceptually, the city and Bridge Street LLC did agree upon the land exchange. this is an agreement for timelines. And part of the agreement provided that certain deadlines would be met either by a certain date or as to be agreed upon later. So we're not asking for a new agreement. We're asking for a modification in order to fit the expedient or the conditions that existed during the time when we needed to get our surveying done and get the plat completed.
Okay. So Andy, let me ask that former question this way. Does the city potentially have any liability because we did not meet our obligations in terms of the timeline?
Potentially, yes.
Okay, thank you. Lastly, any other questions? I guess we're going to continue with the public comment, but this surely got me going. Madam Clerk, who do we have next?
One moment, Mr. Mayor. Will Harrison.
Hi there. I appreciate your concerns and the option or the questions of the moratorium on this project. My particular concern is about the affordability of the housing that's going to be put in. Let's assume that it's going to be 6 stories and we're going to have mixed use housing there. The affordability of that housing is not within reach of many of the people in the city. And I wonder if the CUP perhaps might allow us to set some guidelines on income limits and that sort of thing for I know that this happens in places like Seattle. There's income limits and you cannot buy or rent unless you have this below this level of income. I'm concerned about that part of it. We've got 6 stories going up and nobody around can afford it. And that's my concern. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Appreciate those comments. Madam Clerk?
Rebecca Holland.
Hi, this is a terrible project for downtown right there as it is designed. 6 stories. I want to clear up one thing that was said, that the closure of the road right there was only for automobiles. It was not, bicycles were supposed to go through there. You've all heard me talk a zillion times about that and nothing has been done to replace that. Suggesting that everybody's going to ride on the sidewalk when you aren't allowed to walk and ride anywhere else in downtown is foolhardy. So, you know, somebody better come up with a better answer. The one you're working with is not it. I really appreciate what Will just brought up, the affordability. You know, hand-wringing about having affordable housing is just a facade if this is allowed. Somebody needs to deal with that. We're not seeing any kids riding their bikes down there anymore. You want to take care of the community? I've been here before saying, please, you represent the people that live in this town, not developers from Nevada. And somebody, you're putting the cart before the horse when you keep talking about the comp plan, et cetera, and beating it around and afraid because of liability that there might be something. I would like you to show some backbone on this. This isn't good. You've got the community really, really upset. I'm only one person here talking to you, but I'll tell you, it's off the walls and I wouldn't want to be, well, I guess they're not going to have a meeting where anybody could come and have anything to say. And that is pathetic. I appreciate what Jason was bringing up. So, I mean, you can't just let this go down. You really can't. You're going to have, there's so many people that are very, very, very upset about this. It's not in the historic character of our downtown. It's not anything that's going to help with affordable housing. It's a monstrosity, as I heard somebody put it today. And it's time out. It has to be time out. They don't even have, the cartoon thing is, I'm a daughter of an architect. I was brought up with this, and my dad served on planning and zoning at the appeal level in Ohio for years and years and years. So I have something understanding about this. And this is pathetic that this is being considered. The deadline, they missed the deadline getting their replatting done. Okay. Well, it has been 2 years since you unfortunately made the trade, even though the whole thing was brought to your attention about your negating a bike route that was established by a previous city council and a state bike route that was established and is there, and nobody is dealing with it. It's like the elephant in the room. And somebody, please, step up. This is not right. I'm sorry to be mad about this, but this is not right. Thanks for your time.
Appreciate your passion, Ms. Holland. Madam Clerk, is there anyone else?
Matthew Shubin.
Hey, everybody, thank you for your time. Yeah, I also just wanted to speak my mind on the historic culture, and I also do not feel that this goes with Sandpoint's culture. It's way too high. And I guess my question is, if we did set this precedent for these codes, and I think this is the first of its kind that would be built in the downtown area. If we pause this and we changed this code, even if this structure came through, I mean, would we be able to backpedal and have a new code? I think she touched on it already, that whatever the code is, as the permit is established, that's what you're set on. So if nothing else is able to be done about this structure, which it seems like deadlines weren't met, so we should have a little leeway on this, that we do rush to change this code to be more fitting for Sandpoint's historic culture. I feel like in 2009, when everything was talked about, and I agree, at that time, we needed more foot traffic downtown, and we could use the growth in 2009. But here in 2022, we have seen a tremendous amount of growth. And for all the locals, maybe too much growth. So, I mean, we have the affordable apartments over by Super One. I mean, we have all the condos over by Trinity. I mean, we have the foot traffic. I mean, we have the beds downtown, so to say, that we didn't have in 2009. Now, let's not jeopardize our few people come here because of the ambiance of Sandpoint. They come here for the historic feel. If we start changing it and just turn this into another big city, lake town, I think, sure, we might get these few people living right here on downtown, and it might help out for the time being. But if we ugly it up, nobody's gonna want to come over here. So I just feel like a pause would be wise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shubin. Madam Clerk?
Rachel Baker.
I just wanted to make like one point towards something that Shelby said earlier. He was speaking of like the vitality of downtown Sandpoint and how like a building like this might bring some more life to downtown. However, if the cartoonish figure is an accurate description of what you plan on putting in downtown Sandpoint, storefronts, which are not like affordable to local business owners at all, to start like, creative businesses to keep the flow in downtown. The second part would be, once again, it's a housing situation, putting condos or whatever you plan to put there doesn't support the year-round vitality of downtown Sandpoint, which in turn will not support the, like sparks of time that we do have that. You need, I think, more support for the locals, for the local businesses in order to bring revenue in to downtown, because that's a year-round thing. It's not seasonal. That's all.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments. Madam Clerk?
Jamie Terry.
Hey, y'all. I know most of you, so I feel comfortable saying hey, y'all.
So my husband and I moved here 5 years ago, and we landed in town with full-time jobs and have held those jobs. And in 5 years, we've had to move 6 times. We've had to move 6 times in 5 years because of greed, because we keep getting kicked out of rentals, because rental prices keep skyrocketing. And for 2 people like us who, my husband is the general manager of 219, and I teach yoga and I'm a movement coach. And between the 2 of us, we know almost everybody in town. And I'm trying to imagine how for folks like us who can just barely afford to keep our heads above water with 2 full-time jobs would be more connected to downtown when people can afford $1 million condo and we're still stuck outside of town, living here year round, working, contributing to knowing people, to knowing our neighbors, to knowing this town. We're not going to feel connected to the people who can just be here part of the year and living in these really expensive places that I just like, when do we have enough? And isn't having enough more than enough? And I know that's subjective, and I don't begrudge anyone their abundance at all. I just hope that there's a really strong why that continues to be relevant for the development that's going to go through, because folks like us, we love it here. We want to stay here. We want to continue knowing our neighbors and continue investing in this town. And I don't know if that will be able to keep happening if certain decisions or certain ways of looking at structure and systems don't get adjusted. So I'm a touchy-feely sort of person. I don't know how to speak on like square footage or any of that, but I'm just speaking from the heart and appreciate you all listening.
Thank you, Ms. Terry. Appreciate that. Madam Clerk?
Mr. Mayor, no one else in the room has signed up for this item. I don't know if we want to check with those participating on Zoom.
Yes, if there's anyone participating remotely, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak on this item.
We'll give them just a moment. Sometimes it takes a minute. Mr. Mayor, there are no hands raised.
Okay. You already spoke.
Are you able to share letters that you received?
Yeah. No, so everything that was submitted for the record was to be submitted before, what's the deadline? Yesterday? Yesterday at 5. So we've received everything that was submitted in a timely fashion. Everyone that's wanted to speak at the public hearing has spoken, I believe. Is there anyone else who still wants to speak?
Well, I didn't sign up, but I am.
You can still speak.
Okay.
If you would do us the favor and fill out a sign up card when you're done. After you're done, yeah, that's fine.
I'm Gail Lester. I've lived here forever. This is a town I'm proud of, just like you guys. And we have to take things slowly instead of here's this opportunity, we'll let them do it. We have to look at what we have, and you guys get out there and listen to our people, because I have not heard one person who thinks it's a great idea. And if we have anything to say and any power, which we should work on if we don't, to make decisions about how things look and what we really want instead of what someone else can afford. Whew. I care, and I hope you guys can like take things slowly and make really good decisions on this. There are a lot of people that really do not like it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lister. Appreciate that. And if we can refrain from the hand clapping, that would be great in here. Appreciate it. So council, I'm going to offer this. I Would entertain a motion to amend the recorded agreement that will modify the closing date along with the completion date of improvements along the Bridge Street right-of-way. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. At this time, if a counselor wishes to amend this amendment to this agreement, or amend the motion, I should say, now would be the time. Otherwise, we can just have deliberation and go for a vote. Is there further deliberation from the council?
I would like to deliberate, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
I look at this as slightly different than some of our citizens that have brought, and we're really talking about the character of Sandpoint with this mock design that we've seen. We've talked about the elephant in the room, but the other elephant in the room is that we have a giant hole in the middle of First Street right now, okay? We've seen chain link fence, we've seen wooden fences, we've seen steel girders. I happened to be there the night of the fire. I was at Trinity that evening. Okay, we could not get citizens down to Bridge Street, down Bridge Street. We couldn't get them to Seasons. Safety is another huge issue. I'd be willing to bet that I travel Bridge Street on a more frequent and consistent basis than any person in this community because of where my business is located. The current setup for that sidewalk right now, driving west on Bridge Street, going up to First Street, is probably the most dangerous I've ever seen it in my life. You have no vision coming from pedestrians and bicyclists coming south on First Street when you're trying to turn right. We have a no left lane right now that nobody seems to work with right now anyway. And we've seen the designs in the plat with better turning. I think the right turn lane going down Bridge Street has helped considerably. The pedestrian path going across that connects the corner of Bridge Street over to the other side of First, if everybody understands where I'm talking about, has helped significantly. One of the things I think we need to be honest with ourselves as well too, in terms of our modality, both pedestrian and bicycle right now, is that both sets of people are riding and walking on the sidewalk, in the street, on the bike lane, against traffic, with traffic right now as it's moving forward right now. And I understand when I saw the concept drawings, I was sickened, and I almost thought it was a little bit reckless that those were brought out. And that's what made it all over social media right now. And when I came here in 2006, we had lots of debates about the byway, about Seasons, about the Columbia Bank building, and those being out of the character of Sandpoint, right, in terms of their building and their building design. I think when I look at the Columbia Bank building and I walk in there now and I see it as this gathering space for not only businesses, but our locals, our tourists, our second homers, nonprofits. I mean, how many of our nonprofits are using this building that we were told was a monstrosity in this community at the time? Seasons as well too. I remember at the time in 2006, a Seasons small studio or whatever they got, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, was $600 and some odd thousand. And that was astronomical to most of us in the community as well. 3 years later, 2009, 2010, we were in such an economic way that I could get the Seasons rented out for $130 cleaning fee, right? To bring my people in. Some of the indicators that we've looked at, we just looked at the economic and the housing analysis by our consultants, Leland, right? And I think when you look at those numbers, and from what we're seeing as small business owners in our community, customer count is down, right? Grocery store foot traffic is down. Cart size at the grocery stores is down. There appears anecdotally from what I see at the beach, there are less boats on this lake right now currently. We drive by Bridge Street, or excuse me, the Sandpoint Marina down there. There's no boats that are moving, right? Usually that's a crazy whirlwind of traffic of jet skiers and stand-up paddle boarders and boats trying to get gas and trying to navigate a very narrow channel over there. When we look back at 2009 and where we were in the economy and when some of the comp plan was developed, And we were talking about the vitality, right? We have the loading dock, when the loading dock was there, Pita Pit was across the street where Burger Dock was, Trinity was up on First Street, there was a Starbucks on First Street. We were pushing for vitality downtown to keep our shops open, to keep foot traffic there, for safety for our pedestrians. And the indicators to me look like we're going to be moving in a time where things might become affordable very quick and development may slow because the dollar's not going as far, or their projects aren't working the way they thought they were. They're more expensive. It's tough to see that hole there. It's tough to have those businesses displaced. These are small business owners. When people drive through our community, both locals and tourists, it's one of the most noticeable things that we have in this town is the loss of that historical building right there, right? And I understand being trepid about building design and what we've seen, but we also, I think it would behoove us to also take a look at some of the great things that have been developed that this community thought were going to be evil or harmful, and how our community then turns in those spaces for their own use. We've got amazing people over at the Seasons that are very generous and give their time, their volunteerism. They donate to our nonprofit sector. They have added vitality to this community. The Columbia Bank size, as big as it is, and the drama and the feelings that got whipped up when that was being developed have since made it into just a wonderful gathering space for us. So as much as I appreciate the mayor and Councilor Rule and Councilor Welker's thought process with this, I would stand to move forward with it and to trust the staff without the code change, and hope, like many other developments in this community, that there will be a positive outcome when it's finally done.
I would add to your list of downtown projects, Coachella building was another interesting one. That was basically sat a vacant building for years, and it was a very creative repurpose and reuse by Coachella, and there's now, 150 full-time employees there. So, the criticism there was that it didn't match the historical character. But I, for one, think it's been a great addition to our downtown, and certainly over the blight of whatever it was, 25,000 square foot empty building. So thank you for those comments, Councilor. Council, any other comments?
Mayor?
Yeah.
Do you think it'd be important for us to understand exactly, just for the public, there might be some confusion what we're voting on tonight? We're not voting on the size of the building or how big or what it looks like. That's correct, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, this was an amendment to amend the recorded agreement that will modify the closing date along with the completion date of improvements along the Bridge Street right of way.
Right.
Pushing it back a year to basically, give us time to complete that.
And one more question with that, just to be clear for the public and ourselves. Let's say hypothetically, we did not accept that land swap. They could still have built up and almost very similar. Is that correct?
That's
to some
right.
degree? Okay.
Doesn't change the design regulation, the zoning regulations or design.
I want to be clear for the public and us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Any other comments from the public, from the council? Okay, hearing none.
Mayor, there's been a city resident who's asked to speak.
Okay, we did close the public hearing, I believe.
The public comment time.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. But, in the interest of the discussion here, I know we're all feeling really passionate about this. I welcome Mark to come up, if you would, please, sir. We're doing a few things unorthodox today, but.
So really quick, and I appreciate what Justin just said about the Seasons, and like my wife and I, we moved from the mecca of all resort towns on the East Coast, Asheville, North Carolina, and I grew up there and saw when it was like 35,000 people, and now it's 100,000 people. And going to school in Bend, Oregon, and we all knew what happened in Bend. And can kind of see what's going on in Coeur d'Alene. And we made the choice to move to Sandpoint because people love the outdoors. They love to be involved in the community. They love their neighbors. And just like Justin's saying, it's a huge hole in the ground. And like, yeah, it's ugh. But at the same time, before that building burned down, there was 2 businesses in that building. One's already been relocated. The other was a hair salon. And I think with this new building, as far as I can read, there's going to be 13 condos. Seasons has a lot of people that are packed in there who are part of the community, and having 13 new condos it just doesn't impact the community more than keeping people who pay taxes and live here year round in the community. And I know this isn't part of what we're even talking about, but at the same time, it has to be recognized that there's people leaving left and right. And when you bring in another building with $1 million plus condos, that's going to raise everybody's rent. That's going to raise property taxes. It's a trickle down system. And for a community that has not been based off of tourism, that's coming to grips with tourism, like patience is a virtue, and Asheville's been screwed up. And it's like, you can't even see why you're there anymore. And Sandpoint's beautiful. We come here for the lake. We come here for the mountains. We come here for seeing our friends on First Avenue. We don't come here for seeing Coeur d'Alene. We don't come here for seeing Bend. We don't come here for seeing Portland. We come here because the people we see in the summertime and the wintertime and the spring and the summer when it's all terrible, those are the people that make this community. And yeah, 13 condos won't change a damn thing in this town, except everybody's property taxes and people who are struggling to make it. So thank you.
Thanks for those comments. Okay, the public hearing is now reclosed. Is there any other comments from council at this point?
I have a comment.
Okay.
Just a couple points. First, right now today, Bridge Street LLC does not own the property behind the properties that they do own. The land swap is not taking place. Their proposal is to set a new closing date of August 1st, which is 12 days from now, after which time they will own it. And pretty quickly after that, we can expect a building application. But secondly, there's been no building application submitted today. So any opportunity we wish to have any say without exposing ourselves to liability is between now and the time a building application is submitted. That building application could be submitted next month if we allow this to close in 12 days from now. So I would propose, and I'm open to hearing any comment on this, an amendment to your motion, which is that we push the closing date to September 1st and give ourselves 4 weeks. We've all been waiting for 2 years and 6 months to see what goes in that hole. And perhaps to their own disadvantage, the developer decided 1 week ago to release these drawings. This room would be empty right now if they hadn't done that. And this would have gone through. But that's a lesson for the builder. And now we have the chance to reflect on the decisions we've made in the past. So that's all I'm saying. 1 more month isn't going to mean that there's going to be a hole in the ground for 10 more years. We've lived with it for 2.5 years. So that's my suggested amendment to your motion. We set a closing date of September 1st.
There's a amendment on the floor. Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded. We can have a roll call vote if there's no discussion on that point. Is there any discussion on that point?
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah,
may I,
please.
I just want to point out that that hasn't been discussed with the property owner. So while we might make that motion, maybe Andy could weigh in on our ability to, we would have to go back to the property owner to see if that meets his expectations as well. It's a 2-party agreement.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Andy?
We could delay a decision, but I agree with Amanda. I think that we would need to go back and speak to the owner to determine if that's, acceptable on their behalf as well.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is the proper path forward then would be to deny this this amendment to the agreement. And then there could be direction if there's consensus among council, there could be given direction to staff to follow in that direction. Is that satisfactory to you, Counselor?
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
would there not also be an option? I'm not suggesting it personally, but I would like to check with Andy to table. I don't know if that's more appropriate. I'm not saying I'm tabling it. I'm just saying, is that another option? Is that a better option for Mr. Welker's motion?
I think it would be correct to table a decision until a later date. And you can entertain the motion at that point in time.
So again, we do have a motion on the floor. For those who would prefer to table, your course would be to deny this vote and vote nay. And if you have the majority, then we can move to table or move to direct staff to renegotiate a different date.
So, Mr. Mayor, just for the record, I withdraw my motion to amend your motion.
Okay.
So your motion is the one that's on the table now.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Welker,
No.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor Sproul,
Please forgive me, I'm a little confused.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a motion, the original motion to amend the recorded agreement that will modify the closing date along with the completion date of improvements along the Bridge Street right of way.
Now I'm confused because I
With the original
thought,
motion.
No, I
Mr.
withdrew my
Welker
motion to
withdrew.
amend it.
That's,
He withdrew his
withdrew.
motion.
So we're back to the main motion.
we're on the main motion. That's what I
Good.
voted. right?
Okay,
Okay.
is everybody clear what we're voting on? This is to amend the closing date.
correct, it's August
No.
1st, August, to
No,
amend it.
The original.
Okay, so there's no tabling motion here. There's no.
Correct.
no, okay.
So what's your vote, Joel?
No.
No, okay.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Okay, motion passes. Thanks, everyone, for your passion on that issue. Appreciate you being involved.
Short break.
Yeah, we can do a short break, 5 minutes. Reconvene at. Next on the agenda, we are reconvening here at 7:35 approximately. Next on the agenda is consideration of a resort city visitor lodging tax increase to fund streets and sidewalks. The city's current 7% lodging, hotel, motel room occupancy tax is charged on any short-term room occupancy, 30 or fewer days, as that's defined, for each hotel, motel room rented or leased within the city of Sandpoint, including but not limited to hotels, motels, condominiums, tourists, vacation rental homes, bed and breakfast establishments, and any other business, which in the regular course of business rents or leases for occupancy, temporary lodging to individuals. The current visitor lodging tax of 7% was approved by voters in 2014 with an effective date of January 1st, 2016, scheduled to sunset on December 31st, 2025. At this time, council will consider whether to approve ballot language for the November 8th, 2022 general election for voters to consider increasing the visitor lodging tax from 7% to 14% to provide additional funding for streets and sidewalks projects and extend the current lodging tax collection period to December 31st, 2035. I will now yield the floor to City Administrator Jennifer Stapleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome.
I'm just waiting for my screen to come up. I need to unshare and
what's going on? Give me 1 second. There we go. There we go.
I'm going to hand the gavel over to the president for just a moment. Please continue.
Okay. I provided a detailed report in our, Sarah and I did in our staff report to council, but we put together a short PowerPoint presentation to provide highlights from that report. By way of history relative to our current visitor lodging tax, in 2014, Sandpoint voters approved a resort city local option tax of 7% on short-term lodging. Short-term lodging applies to stays that are 30 days or less. This tax applies to hotels, motels, condos, tourist vacation rentals, or as we commonly refer to them, short-term rentals, bed and breakfast providers, and other businesses who rent or lease temporary occupancy of 30 days or less. Revenues that are received from our local option lodging tax are used to support public safety services. They support staffing and services in our police department as well as our fire department, our public parks operations. For example, they fund at 50% and in some years higher of our city beach lifeguard program. And they are also used to support the spot bus service. Additional revenues beyond what are budgeted also ultimately go into providing property tax relief for local residents. So you will see in your budget presentation for 2023, fiscal year 2023, that there's approximately $200,000 in property tax relief to Sandpoint residents, and that is through excess funds collected through the lodging tax. The current lodging tax, as approved by voters, sunsets December 31st of 2025. Revenues received through the lodging tax, we are now currently averaging approximately $500,000 a year in revenues. You can see our year-over-year revenue increase in 2020. We had approximately $400,000 in revenues realized in 2021. That grew to $558,000 in revenues received, and year to date for our fiscal year 2022, we have realized over $295,000 in revenues, and that is through March or May 31st period. So, and we are based on prior year receipts. We are about 20% over what we received in the previous years. Relative to trends, we suspected council members may have questions about what are the difference between revenues received between hotels and short-term vacation rentals. We're actually seeing a trend over the last 3 years where revenues realized from our hotels are decreasing, whereas revenues realized through short-term rentals are actually increasing. We are close to 50-50, but we have now to date crossed the 50% threshold in revenues received from short-term rentals. Those revenues primarily come from Airbnb, HomeAway, Expedia, and VRBO rentals. The city has contracts directly with some of those providers where they're remitting those any taxes collected directly to the city, as opposed to relying on the property owners to remit those directly. In addition, we are also receiving revenues from Vacasa, Doherty, and Elite online, and then finally from homeowners directly. Again, the trends that you can see is those providers that are the larger providers and those that we have contracts with, we're seeing revenues through those providers increase, i.e. more short-term rentals listed with those providers, whereas direct revenues from homeowners, we have seen a decrease over recent years. Any questions on?
Nope.
Yes.
No.
Okay. We discussed at a prior council meeting, couple prior meetings, 2019 lodging tax study that was put out by the American Hotel and Lodging Association. In that study, they found the national average tax on lodging was 13.5%, and noted that several cities across the country at that time were charging guests a total tax rate over 20%, particularly in significant tourist destinations. As that study is a few years old and there have been changes with travel patterns and visitors relative to our past couple of COVID years, We have done some independent reviews as well and are seeing increases by multiple cities and states across the country since 2019, including throughout our state with some of our resort cities, as well as in some of our neighboring states. State of Montana just increased their lodging tax statewide. So we're seeing it both the local level as well as at the national level. The proposal before council is to consider increasing the local option sales tax, putting this out to voters for a final decision to support additional funding for street and sidewalk improvements. Our 2021 Multimodal Transportation Master Plan found that our street pavement conditions within town are within the national average. However, we have a significant backlog of projects for streets that are in very poor and poor condition of 21%. The backlog that we have here in Sandpoint is double the national average for streets in very poor and poor condition. Our consultants in that study and through the particular pavement review had recommended that we needed to increase our funding to over $1 million a year, actually specifically 1.3 million, to avoid increasing the backlog of very poor streets and prevent further failing conditions with streets. We do have some streets in town that are failing. We've discussed them. Great Northern is an example of one of those streets. In addition, our multimodal transportation master plan also contained a pedestrian priority network improvement plan, and that was focused on replacing some of our worn, unsafe sidewalks, as well as to address connectivity and expansion of connectivity within a priority network system. Annual funding, council over the last couple of years has increased in our budget annual funding for pavement maintenance and reconstruction from $250,000 a year, which had been our previous historical allocation, to $500,000 a year annually. And in your fiscal year 2023 budget, you will see that again, we have presented a budget with that increase of $500,000, which had been discussed in strategic planning and requested of staff by council. In addition, we have increased sidewalk funding from $25,000 a year to $50,000 a year, and through some changes to the sidewalk code, also established an in lieu, so that property owners who were building new homes that were not connected in a sidewalk network, rather than having our patches of a sidewalk on a single lot, could contribute to a sidewalk fund that then would be invested with city dollars and leveraged with grant dollars to ensure continuity throughout an area, as opposed to the patchwork system that we have historically had. We have drafted the question for council consideration and also included a draft increase of 7% for council discussion. As drafted for council consideration, we have included proposed draft ballot language, with the question being, shall the city of Sandpoint, Bonner County, Idaho, adopt an ordinance providing for an increase to 14% from its current 7% hotel motel room occupancy tax on all short-term 30 days or fewer rental charges for hotel rooms, motel rooms, condominium units, tourist homes, bread and breakfast establishments, and similar facilities, and extend the period of years for its collection to end December 31st, 2035. I would note with this that what is before you for discussion and consideration is an increase from the current 7% to the 14%. There have been some public comments that were submitted to council with a misunderstanding that this would reallocate funds from public safety and parks over to streets and roads. To be clear, the 7%, the amount that is currently collected, would continue to go for the uses that voters had approved, which is public safety services, parks, and can also be used for infrastructure improvements. But the increase of 7% for consideration by council would be specifically dedicated to streets and sidewalks. So it would not take away from public safety services or parks. As noted, again, in the ballot language, the revenue from the 7% increase to the occupancy tax is anticipated to be $6 million over the period through 2035, and it would be dedicated for the following purposes: street pavement, ceiling, and associated stormwater infrastructure. We didn't need to say ceiling twice. Pedestrian priority network improvements, including sidewalk and pathway maintenance, reconstruction, and extensions to provide connectivity, including associated curbs and ramps, and other improvements to increase ADA accessibility and safety. Again, as required by Idaho Code, property tax relief. So in this case, even with an increase, if revenues received exceed what we anticipated and budgeted, those revenues go towards property tax relief for Sandpoint property taxpayers. And finally, administrative costs and direct costs to collect and enforce the tax. That is consistent with what we currently have in the lodging tax. And leave that for discussion with the mayor and council.
Great. Council, any questions?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Question for staff here. What is the alternative? Why the bed tax versus a local option tax?
As we considered what were the different options relative to a bed tax as opposed to a sales tax, we felt that we heard strongly last year from the public concerns about the additional tax, particularly on groceries, and the timing with inflationary increases, particularly on foods for local citizens. That is where we assessed whether a local option tax that, granted, is still paid primarily by visitors. We talked about that last year, but yet our local residents are impacted by that as well. And that was brought up by residents, as opposed to the hotel motel short-term rental lodging tax is strictly paid by visitors as opposed to locals. In addition to that, with a local option sales tax, the legislature has been considering for the past few years whether to remove the sales tax from grocery store purchases. When we had the 1% local option sales tax, over 60% of our revenues were coming in from grocery store purchases. So while there would be more collected per year from a 1% sales tax as opposed to a lodging tax, as we have shown here, if the legislature were to make changes and reduce sales tax or eliminate sales tax from grocery sales purchases, you would actually see the amounts would probably be almost the same. And again, then it would be borne by locals and visitors as opposed to visitors only contributing to their impact.
We were given some data around the country of bed tax increases, what the average were across the country, where they were high, where they were low. In looking at this in some of these other communities like ourselves, did we see, we have the ability, if this goes up on our hotels, motels, short-term bedroom, to incentivize those short-term owners to switch to more long-term housing? Have we seen that in other communities that have a bed tax that's 13.5% or higher?
I don't know that I've seen the discussion necessarily that has decrease the short-term rentals. It certainly could have an impact, and we would hope it would have some of that impact here. But absolutely, it would increase the cost for short-term rentals with the potential to make them less desirable. And we are seeing that shift from hotel motel rooms over to short-term rentals. In terms of strategies to try to limit the proliferation of short-term rentals, investors investing in a community, not being part of a community and just doing short-term rentals, we're seeing a variety of things with communities, including increasing these taxes, including increasing permit fees for those, as well as adopting limitations to the number of those short-term rentals. In fact, just last week, The mayor, Amy and myself were on a Resort Cities call talking about that. And while short-term rentals are a significant concern for us, and obviously impact our long-term rental market in cities such as Caldwell, what we heard last week is 60% of their housing stock in total is short-term rentals and non-owner occupied. So
McCall.
or McCall,
Yeah.
yes, 60%. So the problem is significant in the resort cities, and they're trying a multitude of approaches, with the conversation being last week, really us presenting what we currently have by ordinance, and the other cities looking at adopting something more similar to what we have done with short-term rentals. And again, to remind council with that, we do not have a limitation on short-term rentals within the commercial district. We do not have a limitation with short-term rentals on properties that are owner occupied. So if a property owner does an ADU, their ADU then is a short-term rental by right. They're allowed to do that. They need to get a permit from the city. They do need to remit the appropriate taxes, but by right, they're allowed to do that. Our limitation is on short-term rentals in the residential zones that are non-homeowner occupied. And our limitation relative to that is 1% of the housing stock is
Of
what
the
it was.
residential zone housing stock. Yeah, 3% of our overall housing stock. So if you include the commercial areas, we're at 3% of our housing stock is short-term rental. And I just want to say, you know, when on this call with 20 other resort cities across Idaho, we are by far the most restrictive in terms of short-term rentals. And I think that that's been great for Sandpoint. So, but it is universally recognized as aggressive. I think it's worth pointing out.
Can I ask a point of clarification there?
Yeah.
Is that 3% based on the number of permits we issue? Which is approximately 150 to 160?
Yeah.
How certain are we that there aren't unpermitted short-term rentals in Sandpoint?
Ask Andy.
We are working through our enforcement procedures again currently.
So we're not certain that there aren't unpermitted short-term rentals in Sandpoint.
There are definitely unpermitted,
I know of about 3 on my
one
block.
particularly on my street, and we are working through the legalities of it, as staff is doing a good job.
It's kind of an ongoing battle for communities that have permitting requirements. But again, while in the commercial zones, as the mayor's indicated, it's 3% of the units. We don't have a restriction on the number. The number is only in our restriction is only in the residential zone for non-homeowner occupied. So, but the mayor is correct in terms of the number relative to housing stock.
Another question here. Have we, or has the city staff had an opportunity to speak with our lodging partners and their concerns about the raise of the bed tax?
We have not heard any concerns from the lodging tax partners directly here at City Hall, the staff.
Thank you.
Nor have I. Yep.
So upon discussion, when this brought up a while ago, we kind of stumbled into a little bit of language that I felt was very helpful, that it could have embraced the direction that we're trying to go. I do believe that the local option tax it's a mechanism. However, this one is a little bit more suited for the needs that we have dealing with what our challenge. So we stumbled upon the visitor investment for community needs. I would like our public to understand that, you know, we are listening to their concerns. We do know that streets need to be paved. We do know that there's sidewalks. We do know that we want to make sure that things are as affordable as they can be. And we also know that there are many, many visitors here. And what we're asking is for those visitors to contribute to our community need while they are here enjoying our town.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I like that motto, visitor investment for community needs. I would also just point out that the 7% is a burden on operators of short-term rentals and hotels as well. This is a tax that will be shared by the operators. in preparation for this meeting, I reached out to and spoke with some operators of short-term rentals. It is something that if you ask the typical operator, they'd say, why would you ask us to pay for all the streets when there's, 97% of the homes in Sandpoint aren't paying anything for this. So it is just something to consider. I really appreciate that sentiment, and I agree with that sentiment, but it is not entirely going to be paid by the visitors. This is something that everybody and every business owner in Sandpoint who relies on income from short-term rentals or from hotels, they're going to share a burden of this tax.
But I would like to also add that they also reap the benefits of
Absolutely.
owning a business and owning, and owning a hotel and doing tourism for Sandpoint. If you think you can get a $79 hotel room, you're out of your mind. It's $79 plus whatever community wants to rely on it. So I get that it might be a burden on the short-term rental owners, but they also reap the benefits of tax deductions and having a rental. So
Yeah. And one more thing, just so we all know what we're voting on, the current tax of 7% is not the only tax that renters or guests pay. There's the 6% Idaho sales tax, bringing it to 13%. There's a 2% Idaho lodging tax, bringing it to 15%. So we're really talking about raising it from 15% to 22%, the effective tax rate on lodging. So that is significant, and I'm just pointing that out. But you're absolutely right, Kate, and I agree with you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I'd like to point out that I'm not disagreeing with the statements you said, but in my experience is you did get the plus, and that 7 is now going to turn into 14. And I think that's going to be more than likely passed on to the visitors and not passed on to the individuals. And currently in our climate, I don't think we have trouble filling. Town seems very crowded. Any of these short-term rentals, I'm not 100% sure about the hotel space, and considering that this is a national average, it doesn't seem like we're going above and beyond or being extremely restrictive. Part B of my concern is the language. Because you already spoke to it, Jennifer, I think it's going to be confusing still to the public unless somewhere in this language we mention what the current 7% is going for. I'm not an expert in that, but it seems awful darn wordy, and I'm just guessing, let's go 60-40% of the public is not going to make the effort to read through it fully. So I think that we need to make an effort to be short, concise, and make sure that they understand the previous 7% is not being taken away from public service.
Mr. Mayor, they're going to read, I'm being taxed. Absolutely. And then you'll see it on Facebook.
Well, I think that's why we made it clear that it's a visitor tax. It's not, but again, back to the question of the 1%, that's a tax. That would be a direct tax. And so I think it's also how we educate the public and how we help them understand about visitor tax, because, I think that's how it should be put forward as concisely as council rule says, is that to make it, this is paid by the visitors who come here. Tourism, this is a tourism tax, because you're right. The word tax goes on anything and people lose their mind.
So maybe put not a tax on you.
Or just, let's look at item C, property tax relief fund. Like that's, if we're going to talk about taxing people, this is a motivator to also find relief in one's property taxes. I'm a property
You could
owner.
label this ballot initiative the Property Tax Relief Fund Initiative.
Yeah, and just put taxation of Steph. You got it, and then they'll read it.
Oh, we are getting late into the evening.
We still
I
lots
have a
to do.
question for council. If we approve this, is it exact as written, or is there still room for staff to come up with a better version? Or is this, when we approve it, a word for word legal binding kind of thing, Andy?
I think if you're gonna approve it, I'd get the wording down now.
I think the last time we did one, they had feedback for us and gave us.
Did they give you
and
additional-
us direction.
I stand corrected.
And we went back and revised language and simplified work with legal counsel, and still the language has to get submitted to the county for approval for the ballot. So
What is our timeline, Jennifer?
But it was
For submitting
September-
our language, not for the.
It's like September 1st or something.
September 1st, and the reason that we're coming to council at this point with it is last year, what we heard from council is you need to come to us earlier. So that's why we are here. We could also revise language and come back to our next scheduled meeting, which is very long. We can. And also for you to know, in our fiscal year 2023 budget, which we're going to be talking about next, what we've included in the budget, and again, it's budget, what happens determines, but we have included the increase as proposed for the property tax.
Yeah, I saw that.
As well as the associated projects. But if you want to see additional language, Mr. Mayor, before we submit it, we have a couple of options. We could take direction and we could revise language and submit it. We can also get suggestions and direction tonight and come back at the next council meeting with the revised language.
Can I ask a question of
Yeah.
Andy? Andy, is there a legal requirement that we use the terms that are in the bold on the screen? So for example, as opposed to calling it a visitor tax or a bed tax, we call it the hotel motel room occupancy tax on all short-term 30 or fewer days rental charges for hotel rooms, motel rooms, condominium use, tourist homes, bed and breakfast establishments, and similar facilities and stuff. See, then when we get to it, it's like we've got 40 words where it perhaps could be 3 words, and everybody knows what a bed tax is or an occupancy tax.
Tourist tax.
I mean, is there a legal requirement that we call it all of this, that we specify all the things?
Let me give a little bit of background and then the reason that we use the language that we did in the question was that is the language that voters voted on for the last ballot. So again, since we are extending a current tax, that is why we use the same language. Andy may say, yes, we can change it, but that's why we used what we have.
Well, I didn't know the backstory, but I think that's a really valid reason not to change it. However, by law, it needs to be specific enough to enable a voter to determine whether or not, how to vote on something. I would agree with Jennifer. I wouldn't change it if we've done it in the past. My only suggestion would be is that we have a statement somewhere, perhaps after points A through D, that says nothing will change the use of the first 7% of the tax for this purposes so stated, or something to that effect. Don't get too wordy, because if you get too wordy, it gets harder to pass, this type of a ballot initiative.
So I would make the suggestion that the 7% stays and it goes right under the question and it's in bold, because people will like that. And then to speak to Jason and Joel, that we could maybe start it with bed tax and put everything else in parentheses for the people that want to read it. And then the other people are just going to glance at it and go, yeah, that's what I want. It's just a thought, but I think we could do better with our language.
We could redraft, Mr. Mayor, and I can have legal review. And again, we can move forward, or we can come back at the next council meeting with revised language.
Yeah, I think that's good. And, I think Joel's heading this way too. I would like the idea of starting with the title, which, the question is kind of the title here, but I think at the top before the question was, 4 words, amendment to tourist tax.
I think we are limited in the question, and the way this is how it goes on the ballot. So we have to pose the question and then we can do the details. I don't think that we get the ability with title necessarily associated with that, but we can look at it.
Okay.
Mayor, I want to be clear that you guys didn't do a bad job. I don't think that's what we're saying.
No.
We're just like, how can we make this clear
Yes.
to the public? So
it's
just to be fair
for
to
the-
staff, we're not.
Understood,
Okay.
fully understood. No,
Okay.
no offense taken with any
So
of it.
if I can make a suggestion, would be A, B, C, D. If it's legal, have a pamphlet with front and back. A, street improvements, C, back. You turn the back, then it has the language. B, sidewalks, network, C, back.
I
So,
don't think you're gonna be able to. do
okay, that's fine.
On voter education.
I was thinking, yeah,
because we're
that's,
doing an
excuse me, that's what I'm
event,
talking
yes,
about. I'm
we
sorry.
can accomplish that.
All right, thank you.
This is strictly approving the ballot language. So hopefully, with outreach and education about what this is about, we can be much more simple.
So, Mr. Mayor, question for Andy, would this be a good item to table and direct staff to come back with different language?
Yes.
Okay. Then I would make a motion that we table and direct staff to come back with language that the council has expressed to improve this.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? I think that that's fair. I just do want to make the comment that I also noticed that, we're pretty much right at the national medium around bed taxes, and we're well below. You had a 2019 date of 20% was the average resort city. And I would imagine 3 years later, that's maybe considerably higher. And so even coming in at 14%, I think we're still leaving quite a bit of money on the table, so to speak. And there's still quite a bit of room more that we could go there. So I think, raising it to 14%, I think is a very reasonable compromise to keep it affordable for those renting beds and for visitors, and also not to have too much of a dampening effect on our tourism industry. And I think it would do well for our streets and sidewalks. So, all right, there's no further discussion. This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Welker,
The table. That wasn't
The
clear.
table.
Okay.
Yes.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor Sparrow,
Yes.
Counselor McAllister.
Yes.
Motion passes, and we will table that until the next regular city council meeting. Can we do that in 2 weeks, Jennifer?
Yes.
Okay. Which is, somebody help me.
August.
August 3rd.
August 3rd, 5:30 PM, council chambers, 1123 West Lake Street. Thank you. All right, moving on. The next item on the budget is a presentation and workshop followed by council's adoption of the preliminary budget for fiscal year 2023. Council will also declare intention to use foregone levying authority to both use and reserve foregone amounts and schedule an annual budget public hearing. I will now yield the floor to City Administrator Jennifer Stapleton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to be clear to council about this again, what you are doing tonight is you are adopting a maximum budget ceiling. You are reserving the authority to use foregone funds, and you are not making a final decision relative to the budget. So this establishes your ceiling, and you're scheduling, what's before you is to schedule a public hearing for your second meeting in August. And we will have subsequent budget discussions at our next 2 council meetings to get into the budget a little bit deeper. I'm going to spare getting too deep tonight because we are much later than anticipated. However, I am also going to tell you that you've got 2 public hearings coming the next council meeting. So if council members would desire to have a special meeting outside of your regular council meetings, you may want to consider that, and I'll follow up with you following this meeting to see if we want to schedule a special budget meeting, because you're in for a long one at your next council meeting. Again, it's establishing, sorry, my screen is going much more quickly. It's establishing a maximum budget is what is before council. So our maximum expenditures cannot exceed that amount. As we go through budget discussions, the budget could be reduced. There could be changes to the budget. We just can't exceed the maximum amount. And the proposed public hearing date is August 17th. Electronic budget book is posted to the city's website. We also had it in the council packet. And I'm going to try to switch over to that here real quick. Yep. You have a new improved budget book this year. I think you will find it easier to use than your last budget books. You can scroll through your links here as well as up here at the top, which you haven't been able to do in the past. You'll recall that it's opened multiple windows for you and you've had to work through it this way. You can click through and link. Sarah got us to a new format this year that should be new and improved for the council and the public. Again, we've included all of our traditional elements in the budget book, including the budget in brief. One thing I would note for the council in particular relative to the property tax, and another reason why we're not doing the deep dive into property tax tonight, is with changes that the legislature made last year, we don't actually get our final property tax rolls until next week. So what you're seeing in here is our best estimate of what that is going to be. But we will get our final rolls and true that up next week. So you will have it for your next council meeting. We have done a deep dive in discussion relative to the operating budget. Using a fund discussion and broken down by our service divisions as we have done in the past. This year, one of the changes that you will see is in last year's budget, we had proposed creating a new utilities division and adding a utilities director. This year, you will see a new section specifically for the utilities division under our new utilities director, who you will hear from on our next budget item or our next agenda item. Capital, we have a summary of our included capital improvement plan in the proposed budget, broken down again by our service areas and for council members as well as the public. You can click on to those items. I don't know where that one went.
You're just not authorized, Jennifer.
You can go on each of those and do a deep dive on each of those items. And then finally, your traditional and some of our required specific schedules can be found in our budget appendix. Sorry, my computer is really jumping around. So our proposed budget maximum for council to consider for adoption, we are requesting tonight is $49,655,534, which is an increase of approximately $9 million or 22.31% over the fiscal year 2022 budget. The majority of this increase is specifically attributable to the donation that we received from the Russell family for the Travers Park project. So that was a $7.5 million donation. And that donation in whole is included in this budget as we anticipate being under construction in the next budget year. The general fund increase over our prior year is $1.74 million. This anticipates us, and you will see in the capital improvement projects beginning design next year and completing design for the downtown revitalization phase 3. So we're going to be picking up from where we left off on phase 2 with the plan to get at least to Pine Street. So those are our improvements there, as we were discussing on an earlier item, at Bridge and First down to Pine. Ultimately, downtown revitalization, the goal was to get all the way to Superior. So as we move through design and as we finalize costs, we'll get a sense of how far we can get, but we do anticipate that we will be at least down to Pine, if not beyond that. Again, as discussed under our last agenda item, we did include the proposed increase in Resort City occupancy tax from the 7% to 14%. And so that results in an overall increase in revenues and associated expenditures of $1 million. And we do have some general fund carryover funds that were budgeted for this year that we're carrying over into next year. Specifically for the City Hall upstairs remodel is proposed. So we have finished phase 1 of the City Hall remodel, which was the first floor customer service, HVAC for COVID, as well as now police are back into their space with the police remodel. And we're working through the punch list on that. We have included in next year's budget final remodel completing City Hall, and that includes the upstairs. So that would be the end of our city remodel project. Special revenue funds, we have included an increase of $8.3 million. And again, 7.5 million of that 8.3 million increase reflects the donated funds for the Travers Court facility, as well as donated funds for the all-wheel skate park expansion and other parks master plan projects. All of these projects are budgeted to use beginning cash that we have available. The overall budget in our enterprise funds has actually decreased by approximately $975,000 as we paid off some wastewater bonds as well as water bonds as discussed at previous council meetings. We have included for employees at the city a 2% market increase. So that is an adjustment overall to the scale. Council will recall that we upfronted a 2% increase a couple of months ago, and we accomplished that and those costs in this year's budget as a result of healthcare savings that we realized this year, where we actually had our healthcare premiums for employees decrease. And so with those savings, that supported upfronting a market increase this year. And we've included in the budget an additional 2% market adjustment to our range effective January 1st of 2023. This is based on benchmarking with regional cities, looking at trends of what other cities up and down the state and throughout our area. In addition, our employees, as approved in our compensation policy as adopted by council, includes step increases. So growth for years of service and knowledge with the city, and those step increases are included in the budget that has been presented. Overall, what you will see when you review the budget is our expenses across city divisions, excluding wages and benefits with the increases I just discussed. We're seeing that they're fairly consistent and flat with what we experienced in fiscal year 22. And any increase that you're seeing are primarily due to one-time projects that we have across the city. Again, as noted in our last budget item of property tax relief of approximately $200,000, our actual number is $208,052 of property tax relief to citizens as a result of excess lodging taxes collected in the previous fiscal year. So residents are seeing that property tax relief in this budget that we have proposed, and it has reduced from the maximum allowed property tax levy. Anything else I need to include, foregone? Okay, we have included use of $129,847 of available foregone for the purchase of public safety vehicles, and that's in our police division. We are still waiting for police vehicles to arrive that we ordered last fall. So we are experiencing supply chain delays and we'll have an order for this next fiscal year. So again, our recommendation and request of council is to approve the preliminary maximum budget for fiscal year 2023. Set a date for the public hearing at your August 17th council meeting, and between those times, we will have further budget discussions in depth at our council meetings. And once again, I'll be reaching out to council members individually to sit down with you and answer any specific questions that you have and include those in all budget presentations that we do for the public.
Thank you, Jennifer. And how can the public access this this document through OpenGov?
Yes, it is on the front page of our website.
Oh, gosh, I was just there and I didn't see it, but I
Refresh your, you might
refresh.
need to refresh your cache.
Just-
Be about
Okay.
30 seconds, Mr. Mayor. and
Okay.
we'll see.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you for that presentation, Jennifer. Council, any questions?
I just had a comment. There are a couple things that I've tried to click on that don't seem to have a link. So should I just email you about that?
Email us about it. So we're still doing a little bit of fine tuning. like
Okay.
we do in the past. We're still, and as we work through discussions with council, we fine tune narrative, we get more detail in there. So again, if the public is interested in certain aspects of the budget, I'd encourage people to go back and continue to look through those pages as we're working through our budget discussions and budget workshops. They will be absolutely final with no additional changes the week before the public hearing.
Okay, I think for whatever reason, I clicked on maybe the playground and yeah, that was the one I clicked on. So I don't know what that means, but the dog park's on there, so I don't know.
excellent.
Maybe it's just a link that's not linked somehow.
We'll take a look and do a full test on the, we'll do a full test on the book again tomorrow.
Everything else I looked at today seemed to come up, so.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I'd just really like to thank the staff. This is a huge lift, and this is singly one of the most important things that we as a body up here, as well as you as staff, prepare for our community, whether they choose to look and dig in and understand how well-run our city is managed and represented. Big thank you to all of you. I know it's a lot of work, so thank you.
Council, any other questions? All right, is there anyone from the? Oh, I'm sorry, we're not taking public comment. We're going to save that. I miss that every time. We're going to save that for the public hearing that will be scheduled on August 17th. So I'll entertain a motion for City Council to adopt the fiscal year 20 preliminary budget, declare intent to use foregone levying authority to both use and reserve foregone amounts, and schedule the annual public hearing for August 17th, 2022 with your approval. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Mayor.
It's been
makes the
moved and
motion.
seconded. Yes.
The motion.
Jason.
Me, yeah, I moved.
Second
And
was
Joel
Joel.
second.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Welker,
Yes.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Sprow,
Yes.
Counselor Dick.
Yes.
Motion passes. Next is an update on utility rates, then a review of city fees, and council will schedule a public hearing to consider proposed new fees and existing fees proposed to increase more than 5%. I will now yield the floor to City Administrator Jennifer Stapleton once again.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually going to hand the utility discussion over to our Utilities Director, Greg Lanning. I would note for the public and remind the council that we did have a workshop on utility rates about a month ago. And so we're coming back from that workshop with final recommendation and rate for consideration for council to schedule for public hearing.
Okay. And now the headliner.
No problem.
I would note while Greg is pulling this up too, relative to our rates, that one thing council will notice is our typical schedule of rates across the city when we are making rate changes. Those rate changes take effect at the beginning of the next fiscal year. So that is October 1st. As we look at utility rates, most particularly our connection fees, or as we call them, our NUF fees, you will see a recommendation relative to those rates, that following public hearing, if that those be adopted immediately. And Greg can speak more about this if council has questions, but that is typical with what you do when you're doing connection fees, because much like what we talked about earlier tonight about submitting applications, connection fees, what you tend to see is when you're making a change in fees, you get a run on the bank if you adopt a fee and it is not taking place for 30 or 60 days. So building permits that we have in are paying the rates at the time that they submit their permit. So that is to avoid the run on the bank that you kind of get on utility fees. And again, NUF fees are about growth and development paying their fair share of our infrastructure systems. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Greg.
So let me just clarify what you said there. So they would go into, when would these go into effect, these new fees?
So it would be following the public hearing. If council chooses to adopt the fees following the public hearing, they would go into effect immediately.
Okay.
Your public hearing scheduled for August 17th.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Go ahead, Greg.
Well, thank you, Mayor and Council, and thank you, Jennifer. She pretty much took care of my presentations. Did you do? There's times when I'm sitting back there, in longer meetings, and I've had a career of long meetings, and I wonder if my voice will even work, let alone remembering anything in my presentation. And so far, it hasn't failed me yet, but and today or tonight, at least, I got a PowerPoint as well to help guide me along. Tonight, as Jennifer mentioned, there's just a slight review of our June 8th workshop, which you remember was, 2.5 hours also. And there was at that time, we had our consultant here, Angie and Brooke, and they did a great job, I think, in describing all of the gory numbers behind in terms of the financial work done to come to this point. But you'll see in this presentation those slides, and if you were at the shop, the workshop, you may recognize some of the slides. They'll kind of anchor you as to what the review points are. And then there are slides in here that I built myself just to summarize for that. So in terms of a pure update, the only thing that's different from that June 8th workshop is the new water option 3. So I'll spend some time on that, and I'll probably rush to that one as a matter of fact. And at the very end, a slide referring to the actual budget inputs. If you were to drill down and look at in rates and fees, you'll see these percentages at this summary slide that are in the budget document itself. The rate study itself, as Brooke and Angie reminded us, has these 4 basic components to it. To date, we've only looked at revenue and new user fee updates. These are both, and I'll explain, with the revenue required, then we have percentage increases versus actual work done on the cost of service analysis or the rate design itself. Cost of service analysis will put these individual, like businesses and commercials or heavy industrial. Cost of service will look at the water system and say, is this pipe this big because of this industry, for instance? And they'll prorate that back to those individual consumer classes, if you will. The rate design itself looks into, a favorite topic here is these tiered rates and residential use of water for summer irrigation in particular. And whereas, the more water you use, the more expensive it gets by the virtue of these tiered rates. Those were good decisions back then, probably even today. And we'll still have those discussions, but we're working on that later on with our consultant to come back and discuss the exact rate design. Back when those tiered rates were done, since I brought it up, conservation was a big issue, and it still is. You know, water conservation. Are we using water appropriately? And this is a financial incentive to really look at the use of your own water, and your pocketbook will help dictate that. I should note also a lot of master plans back in that day, and still a little bit today, required a conservation goal as well. You shall have a 5% conservation goal. And so the means to the end at that time was these tiered rates, for instance. That's rate design. So those two in the grayed out areas are yet to be seen. So starting out with that new user fee, facility fee, the NUF, this once again is a slide that they prepared. It's got their logo up there and it identifies them down on the corner, FCF's group. So it's a slide we've seen before. It's an important one for the NUF in particular, in my mind, because it gave the actual variables that go into the NUF calculation as determined by the Hayden lawsuit. So you can go back and look at that. I know during the workshop, we kind of looked at that and says, gosh, some of this is counterintuitive. And to me, it was too, and it is still, but it is the formula. And so the point here is these NUFs are based on that lawsuit and industry guidelines to get to these NUFs. The NUFs themselves, current NUFs since 2016 haven't changed in water from $3,400 to a proposed rate of nearly $7,900. So you can see the impact of these increases. Sewer from 4,400 to a proposed of 6,300. So it's important to note that we were well on our way. As a matter of fact, NUFs back in the day were close to this before the Hayden lawsuit, before we ratcheted them back. So even in the 2010 study, it identified NUFs as being far more than what we had today.
Can I interrupt you for one sec, Greg? These are for single family residences or per ERU?
Thank you. In the water, it's an MCE, and I'll define that. And for sewer, it's an ERU. An MCE is a meter capacity equivalent. So water, it's $7,800 for a 3/4 inch connection. I've got a table and we can refer to this. If you have a larger service, you know, such as a 1 inch or a 2 inch or even a 4 inch, those increase almost exponentially. Because buried in that formula, and I think we talked about this, is the size of the pipe and the area of the pipe. And it's the radius squared. So a 1 inch or a 2 inch is much greater by the radius squared than a 1 inch, for instance, 4 times as much. So the rates themselves follow that exact same schedule and they get large. That's based on your ability to use that water. You know, if you order up that type and that size of meter, it's your ability to use the capacity of that meter, hence MCU. Sewer is an ERU, an equivalent residential unit, to answer your question, which is a typical household, for instance, in this
Greg,
case.
can I just ask a follow-up on that?
Yes.
And this is just something I do not know. If a homeowner wished to build an ADU, is that a new residential unit or would they have 1 meter for their house plus their accessory unit?
Mr. Mayor, may I?
Yeah, please.
It's 1/2. So an ADU is a half of the cost that you see there per our current adopted rules.
Interesting. So half enough
Half enough.
is enough. Okay, got it.
Exactly.
And an ERU is basically, remind me how that's defined. It has a kitchen, I think, and can you give me the rough definition of an ERU?
An equivalent residential unit is, you know, a 2.4 people and what they would typically consume, or in this case, discharge to the sewer. So it has a population element related to it. And then it also is coincidentally, you know, a typical house in this case. So based on a 2.4, and that's a, I guess
my question, sorry to cut you off there, but
it's all right.
it is is a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, or a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, or a single-bedroom apartment? Like, I just want to get it without having, I know that's a little bit of a complex formula. Maybe we don't need to go that far down the rabbit hole. I just want to get a little bit of perspective on whether an ERU distinguishes between those 3 categories.
There's a distinction, and I see Amanda looking it up, and I didn't bring the schedule with me.
That's okay.
But we
She-
have about a full page schedule that says, you know, if it's an apartment complex or if it's a bowling alley, et cetera, it has then calculated out all these ERU components.
Thank you. And if you want to, okay. Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate that. I think the context could be helpful.
Equivalent residential sewer user, a sewer user has discharged 6,000 gallons of sewage during any month of a calendar year. Wow, that helps. Now, 6,000 gallons then does relate back to that population element, 2.4. We all use about, you know, on the order of 210 per person gallons per day. That times 4, you know, or 2.4. I just went through a huge exercise like this, and I have to now report back to DEQ what we call a declining balance in ERUs. And that's why I've been working in some different formulas. Notwithstanding, we have a nice schedule, well, a schedule that needs some work also, but for all of these different uses, what the ERU equivalent is. But 6,000 gallons, that's describes a typical house.
Thank you.
One of those 2 green boxes in the earlier slides was the revenue requirements in water. You might recall this slide. We defined what is our existing water service area. It goes up there into the northeast, into other communities. But that is currently what we serve for water. This has a distinction because there's a capital improvements recommended outside of this area, you may recall. We have capital improvements that we have to do within the boundary. Those are all defined by those red ones. The red ones were the more important projects. The yellow ones are less important, but you can see we have some projects outside of the boundary. So we made a distinction of paying for capital outside of the boundaries as well as inside of the boundaries. And that amount of capital outside of the boundaries was 16.3 million. And we looked at option 1, should we fund all of those projects outside of the boundaries? And you can see that growth pays for growth element comes back in that Jennifer mentioned. Option 2 was to exclude system expansion for those. And that was entirely growth pays for growth. In other words, none of the existing rates would pay for that 16.3 million. All growth would pay for growth. I summed this up in a table for us, and I think it's a little easier to look at. Option 1 was to fund all capital. Option 2 was to exclude expansion. Option 1 was a 6.5%. I think I said that slightly wrong now that I think about it, thinking back, but this table helps. Fund all capital, that meant debt financing as well as a 6.5% increase. Option 2 was to exclude expansion or expansion capital and growth. And that was a 3% increase with no debt required. You might recall in our discussion that I think the comment was, hey, for $1 more a month, why not just pay for all capital? And yet we heard direction, you know, maybe there's something in between that. And likewise, what we've learned since that workshop is this, what I'm starting to call jurisdictional boundary capital. In other words, in option 1, if it requires debt financing, the agent for that debt financing is the city of Sandpoint. And so we're determining financing with our residents for capital outside of our city. And so that becomes problematic. And we're still figuring that out in terms of the legal consequences and our jurisdiction even outside of our city boundaries. We have not been set up officially as a water district, for instance, and we do not have intergovernmental agreements with other communities or the county. And so this is still work in progress. And I don't know if Jennifer will speak to that more, but it drove our decision to come up with option 3, one that funds capital, potential capital outside of those boundaries, but within our jurisdictional authority. This one, by coincidence, doesn't require any debt, and it's a 3.8% increase in rates across the board.
And so I'm sorry, Greg, can you say that one more time? How do you define the jurisdictional boundary capital?
Those are now, whereas in the map, we had, you can see the red and the yellow projects north and east of the blue line. Up in the pink, which is Ponderay, up in the light green, which is Kootenai, and even one project out in the purple, which is in the county. Those are not within our jurisdictional authority or boundaries at this point. We're still getting some definition on that. Whereas projects within our ACI especially, we have some control. We're going to be talking about and negotiating our ACI, and then we have the ability to grow within our ACI, both for reasons of the negotiation within the ACI and the definition of ACI, but also those typically come as annexed properties as well. And therefore, we will have annexation agreements, development agreements, and authority to do those projects. The projects within our ACI are included and considered jurisdictional capital. Now, out of that $16 million plus that you saw earlier, this greatly reduces the amount of capital. Nearly 14 million of all capital is outside of our jurisdictional boundaries. And therefore, it only includes then a 3.8% increase with no debt. So it compares very favorably to, the 3% increase especially. Are there any other questions on that in particular? This is the one change and the one update that all the rest of this is the same as the workshop and for review only.
Any questions at this point, Council? No? Thank you, Greg.
You're
Please
welcome.
continue.
Sewer revenue, again, a slide that you've seen before. It's interesting, these options only looked around financing. Is a conventional revenue bond any different than a low interest loan financing? And the answer is yes. Option 1, revenue bonds, was a 30% increase. Option 2, low interest loans, is a 19% increase. By the way, and for your knowledge and to repeat, this is a 19% increase over the next 3 years. This is budget focused, so this budget only includes this particular 19% increase. But you'll see in subsequent next 2 years, an additional ask for another 19% to get us up to what we think is the needs for capital improvements. Sewer obviously was the majority of it was the sewage treatment plant. And,
So that's 19% per year over 3 years.
that's correct.
I would note on that, as per our workshop discussion, this 19% increase, and if council approves this and moving forward with the wastewater treatment plant, our next step this fall, and we were encouraged by DEQ, was to apply for low interest loans through the revolving loan fund. With infrastructure dollars that have come through, there's a substantial amount of money available, and we would potentially qualify for loan forgiveness. With loan forgiveness, that changes what we would need to do in future years. So at this time, what's before council, while the plan projects that we could need 19% per year, there were a lot of variables that could come into play that could reduce that amount. And for the public hearing and the decision that the council be making, as Greg notes, you will be making a one-year decision. You are not making future years. that would come back in future years as part of your fees process, just like what we're doing this year.
Thank you so much for that. The 19% in this case is the worst case scenario. And we're very optimistic that we're going to, with all the good money floating around, that we'll get good loan forgiveness through the DEQ revolving loan fund and that avenue. So combined, the highlighted ones are the ones that ended up in the budget. You'll see the options, the percent increases. This is just a repeat of those slides. And now includes option 3, jurisdictional boundary capital with a 3.8%. The other, rather than add all these into one table, I also included numbers that you've seen before also. Gee, what's the effect on a typical monthly bill for a resident here in Sandpoint? Option 1, 37, you can read for yourself. The increase for the preferred option on 3 and water is an increase of $1.42. The increase of a typical sewer bill is $12.20 from $64.20 to $76.40. And this is the last slide and the summary slide of what you see now built into the fees and rate schedule that in this budget proposal.
Is that it?
That's it.
Oh,
Thank you,
wow.
Mayor.
Okay.
I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Council, questions?
Mr. Mayor, Greg, first of all, thank God you're on this team. I mean, seriously, like that, like just the simplicity, you make it so simple. But I do have just one question, just to kind of wrap all this up. Are these proposed increases going to put us on the path to having a long-term sustainable solution for wastewater treatment at Sandpoint, in your opinion? Is this the right way forward to get a new wastewater treatment plant in Sandpoint?
Mr. Mayor, thank you, Mr. Counselor. I really appreciate that question, and I believe it's one of the main reasons you brought me here was exactly this, was to dig into the rate study and especially get a handle on capital and help us build that wastewater treatment plant. This also includes those clogged arteries on the sewer side as well. This represents a 5-year plan, which includes entirely reconstructing the sewage treatment plant. So this is our path to finally getting our sewage treatment plant rebuilt.
I feel like we should give you a standing ovation, but it's appropriate.
My comment would be, can you write the ballot language for the other thing?
Yeah.
Or just show up with props.
But unfortunately, the ballot language for the other thing would be, this is necessary to maintain the horrible condition of our streets.
Enough.
Sorry,
local
Amanda.
tax.
All right. Spin doctor. Well, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that.
Thank you. So if there's no further questions, appreciate that presentation. Great.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
Greg had the changes with utility rates, and I would note for council, we can highlight it if you want us to highlight out of the staff report, the proposed new fees or changes to fees exceeding 5%. It is noted in your staff report. The request to council once again is to schedule a public hearing for the revised fees, which includes the utility fees, but we've also redlined your fees and given you a description of, again, new fees and fees over 5% in your staff report for our full citywide fee schedule.
Okay. Is that clear for everybody? Any questions? Okay. All right. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Greg. So I will, on that note, public comment will not be taken this evening on this issue, but reserved for the public hearing that will be scheduled for August 17th. If this proposed motion passes, which I would entertain a motion to schedule a public hearing for August 17th, 2022 to consider proposed new fees and existing fees proposed to increase more than 5%. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? This will be a roll call vote.
Counselor Groot,
Yes.
Counselor Dick,
Yes.
Counselor Rule,
Yes.
Counselor Sprow,
Yes.
Counselor McAllister,
Yes.
Counselor Walker.
Yes.
Really want to find my pen. Motion passes. And with that, this meeting is finally adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your